Chapter 1400. Kingdom of Dawn, Cage Mountain Command Post. A huge strategic map was erected in the middle of the conference room to mark the current trajectory of the floating island. Every day, members of the General Staff Department and the Intelligence Department would update the data, which became the most important piece of information for the higher-ups of the First Army. The thick, bright red path on the map indicated that the floating island did not follow the ridge of the mountain to the south and enter the Kingdom of Everwinter. Instead, it changed its course midway and entered the fertile plains. Its altitude was constantly decreasing, and it was now less than a kilometer away from the ground. According to this trajectory, it would cross the impassable mountain range in 4 days and enter the territory of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As the target was too large, anyone who set up a telescope on the mountain top would be able to see the hazy gray figure. It was like a thick dark cloud, adding a layer of haze to the continent that had just ended the months of demons. The pre-war meeting against the demons, the deity of gods, was held. Even though the higher-ups had reached a consensus that the First Army was unable to stop the floating island's movement with their current strength, fleeing at the sight of the wind was not the style of the army. No matter what, it was necessary to probe its strength and attempt to stop it. Against an enemy that lacked intelligence, fighting was the most effective way to understand them. Before His Majesty the King's final solution arrived, it was the most important task for the army to be fully prepared. Furthermore, the enemy had coincidentally given them the opportunity. According to the latest surveillance data, the demon stronghold's altitude has decreased by more than 2,000 meters, which is about the height of half the ridge of the continent. Edith slapped the report in her hands. Compared to its previous altitude, the decrease is rather abnormal. The General Staff Department's deduction is that maintaining the stronghold's altitude requires the expenditure of magic power, and it is proportional to the altitude. And this altitude depends on the relative position of the ground, which leads to this phenomenon. Although the information provided by His Majesty the First Army referred to the floating island as the deity of gods, the Pearl of the Northern region preferred to call it a stronghold or a moving castle. At the very least, when assigning missions, it would not give her subordinates the misconception that they were fighting against God. Most of the higher-ups of the First Army had completed secondary education, but even so, it took them some time to understand the General Staff Department's deduction. In other words, after crossing the impassable mountain range, this thing will rise again? Brian asked. If we didn't guess wrongly. Edith shrugged. The reason isn't important, Iron Axe said. What's important is the fact that it is only 100 meters above the impassable mountain range. What's the situation on your side? The survey team has confirmed it. Vanner stood up and walked to the map. There are 2 platforms suitable for cannons in the distance from the Metal Stone Ridge to the Cage Mountain. As long as it doesn't change direction halfway, we can fire, we can. As long as it doesn't change direction, we can of it. During the period of war where weapons were being replaced rapidly, the 152mm Longsong cannon naturally ushered in some improvements. For example, the barrel was more convenient for mass production, and the trailer was more suitable for vehicles. The most important changes were the enlargement of the chamber and the arrival of new ammunition. Ever since Anna was in charge of the final precision processing of the new barrel, the overall quality had declined to a certain extent, specifically manifested in shooting accuracy and durability. However, the new cannon relied on a larger charge and a more advanced gunpowder formula, allowing its range to reach the 18-kilometer mark in one step, almost doubling its original range. Furthermore, the production of witches had also increased. Losing 2 or 3 cannons was no longer a big deal. I think the demons are most likely coming for the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Although the floating continent can produce red mist, the red mist will dissipate once it is moved. Therefore, if the enemy really wants to occupy a piece of land, they have to build a large number of red mist towers. Iron Axe muttered. This time, with the support of the obelisk, their plan to build the towers will not be hindered. The Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart will also become one. Therefore, the success rate of intercepting the enemy's predetermined route is not low. The only thing worth discussing is the effect. Obviously, this was completely different from the bombardment of the fortress-like monstrous beasts. The former had a clear goal, which was to destroy the monstrous beasts before the enemy noticed. As long as a few shots hit, they would be able to reap great benefits. But the outcome of bombarding the floating continent was already predictable. Even if they could touch the demon city, the damage they could cause would be extremely limited. And against a stronghold surrounded by devil beasts, 18 kilometers was definitely not a safe distance. Considering that there was still some distance between the edge of the target and the center, this meant that the intercepting team had to get closer. I think it's worth a try, Chief Commander. Van thought for a moment before replying. After the floating continent enters the kingdom of Wolfheart, only the aerial knight will be able to fight the enemy head-on. The first army will only be a supporting character. Therefore, this is basically the only chance for the artillery division to act. Even if we can't cause much damage, at least we can show our attitude that humans will never submit to a miracle. Iron Axe turned to look at the Pearl of the Northern region. What do you think? Edith was silent for a long time. After a few minutes, she nodded. I have no objections. In that case, Iron Axe took a deep breath and ordered the higher-ups present, we will discuss the intercepting plan according to this plan. Time is of the essence, I need to see the conclusion immediately. Yes. Everyone replied in unison. The results of the discussion were quickly summarized. 2 high points suitable for shooting would be set as artillery positions, but one would be real and the other fake. The latter would be closer to the path of the mobile stronghold to confuse the enemy. Hummingbird would be in charge of transporting the cannons into the Hermes Mountains and destroying them on the spot before retreating to prevent the enemy from seizing the weapons. Other than the First Army, the Aerial Knight Army and the God's Punishment Witches would also be responsible for providing cover and support. With a goal in mind, the next step was to refine the process and implement it. The army was already rather familiar with such a process. There was no need for further instructions, the various departments were already busy. After returning to the General Staff Officer's office, Philin could not help but ask the minister, "My lady, was there anything wrong with the meeting just now?" Edith stopped in her tracks. "Why do you ask?" "Because you spoke much less than usual, I see." She raised her eyebrows. "I was just thinking about a problem. The demons call the floating continent the deity of gods, so it is obvious that they have high expectations for it. But from the looks of it, it is only a platform that provides red mist and has not displayed any other extraordinary aspects. So, this thing might be hiding some tricks that we do not know of, and might not be as simple as it seems." "Then why didn't you bring it up during the meeting?" Philin was puzzled. "Because other than increasing unease, there isn't much use to it. Since we do not know anything, we are unable to come up with any effective countermeasures. I cannot just rely on guesses to come up with a plan, but the intercepting troops can tell us the answer, regardless of what the answer is." Upon hearing this, Philin felt goosebumps rising up his back. Edith's tone did not change in the slightest and was as calm as ice. The most important task for the army now is to do everything possible to prepare for future strategies, and trial and error is also one of the preparations. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertisement. Chapter 1401. The weather on the impassable mountain range was always slower than the foot of the mountain. In the past, Cat's Claw did not understand this saying, but now he finally understood its true meaning. Following the end of the months of demons, most of the cities and towns had entered the snow-melting period. Wherever one went, the pitter-patter of water could be heard, and new green sprouts could be seen in the damp soil by the roadside. But on the impassable mountain range, everything remained the same. Most of the places were covered in white snow, and the edges of the cliffs were lined with icicles taller than a person. When passing through the small path below, one would always be worried that these thick needles would suddenly fall. If not for the help of Hummingbird and the God's Punishment Witches, it would have been impossible for them to transport the heavy weapons to the designated position. But what made Cat's Claw feel more diffident was the target of this mission, the demon's mobile stronghold. It was really too big. Although it was still more than 20 kilometers away, it could be seen directly without the use of a telescope. It seemed to occupy half of the northern sky, and whether it was its silhouette or aura, it was incompatible with the surrounding world. The exposed mountain rocks were pitch black and had sharp edges, as if they were carved by a knife and an axe. It formed a sharp contrast with the revived fertile plains. The floating island was filled with red mist. The center of the stronghold was the highest, and then it slowly dispersed in all directions. When it reached the edge, there were only a few strands left, pouring down along the low ground. From afar, it looked like red ribbons hanging around the land. This huge object gave Cat's Claw a great deal of pressure. In the past, a distance of 20 kilometers meant absolute safety. Both sides were still tiny black dots on the ground, and it was difficult to discover or fight. But now, this distance seemed so close, and he felt that he could be knocked down and crushed by this floating mountain at any time. Compared to the enemy's stronghold, his own position and cannon seemed somewhat insignificant. The command had probably considered this point, which was why they gathered these officers who had been fighting with the army. He retreated back to the hidden sentry post and exhaled a long white breath. Taking deep breaths could help relieve tension, which was also what His Majesty often said. "What, are you afraid?" Jop bent over and moved closer. "Pooey." Cat's Claw glared at him. "Why would I be afraid? That's nothing to be ashamed of." The latter picked up the telescope and poked his head out from the observation hole of the simple fortification. "To be honest, this reminds me of the scene when the artillery unit faced the first charge of the Longsong stronghold's night." Cat's Claw was slightly taken aback. Of course, he would not forget his first experience on the battlefield. Similarly, the months of demons had just passed, and he was also faced with aggressive enemies. There were several times when he almost dropped the solid shells he was carrying and hit his feet. Before he became a member of the army, he could never have imagined that he would one day be able to stand straight in front of the knight who was running towards him and face them head-on, instead of kneeling down in fear and begging for mercy or turning around to run away. Even though he thought he was going to die, his legs were shaking like a sieve. This time, the opponent was a floating continent. When the memories in his mind overlapped with reality, Cat's Claw noticed that his heartbeat had calmed down significantly. "I remember now. You were so nervous that you almost stuttered." "Ha, not to mention me, even Captain Van, wasn't much better." Jop stared at the target and said, "But at least we didn't forget to fire the cannons." "That's enough." Cat's Claw nodded his head slightly. Indeed, being afraid was not a big deal as long as they could complete their duty. Regardless of whether the enemy was a noble knight or a floating continent, the only thing they had to do was to fire the cannons. "Wait, there's movement on the stronghold." Jop suddenly lowered his voice. "It's the devil beasts. The demons have reacted." "So fast?" Cat's Claw's heart tightened. This distance was still far from the firing range of the cannons. If the demons discovered them too early, the operation would most likely end in failure. "There are a lot of them." "Heavens!" Jop gulped. "There might be more than 100 of them." He hurriedly raised the telescope and saw black dots flying out from the red mist and gathering at the edge of the floating continent. Cat's Claw was very familiar with this scene. It was obvious that the other party was gathering troops and an attack was about to begin. But the location where the demons were gathering seemed to be a little off. The two looked at each other and reacted at the same time. They discovered a camouflage camp. Compared to the real blocking position, the other preset position also had quite a number of cannons, but they were all replicas made from wood and paint. Furthermore, they were not covered with a camouflage net. From the looks of it, this arrangement was obviously effective. According to the plan, the enemies coming from the sky would be blocked by the air knight. Without a doubt, the more outstanding the teammates were, the longer they could hide the bait point. "I wonder if they noticed the enemy's movements." Cat's Claw muttered. Due to the floating continent's red mist, the blocking team did not arrange for witches to accompany them. This also caused the artillery team to be unable to contact the entire army. Compared to fighting with lightning and Maggie's help throughout the entire process, their field of vision was undoubtedly much narrower now. But thinking that such situations would only increase in the future, he could only get used to this change as soon as possible. Don't worry. Jop clenched his fist. You must know that the one leading the Air Knight is His Excellency. This is Maggie. We have detected abnormal movements of the demons, Ku. The exploration group's report sounded from Tilly's cockpit. Direction, 3 hours east. Number 103. There are more than one large devil beast in the formation, Ku. Roger that. Tilly injected magic power into another sigil of listening. The enemy has made a move. We cannot rule out the possibility of moving the magic eye. Seagull will continue to hover and await further instructions. Understood. Andrea replied. Are you going to board? Aha. She casually replied. Help me ask Shavi if the feeling of piloting a plane isn't bad, right? Your Highness, when will you return? I feel like it will fall at any moment. Shavi's tearful complaints could be faintly heard from the sigil. Concentrate. Vendi immediately interrupted her. Hold the control stick tightly, just like during training. I will help you with the rest. Ever since she obtained the Phoenix, Tilly began to look for a successor. Compared to hiding behind the scenes, she wished to personally avenge Ashes. In the end, Shavi took over this heavy responsibility and set the record for the shortest time from training to actual flight. Of course, other than her enthusiastic guidance, Vendi, who was becoming more and more proficient in controlling the wind, was also a key factor. As long as one did not operate the glider carelessly, it would be hard for any problems to occur with the glider powered by Vendi. That's the general situation. Andrea facepalmed. Other than Sylvie feeling a little dizzy, everything else is basically normal. Very well, then I shall set off. Tilly. Andrea's voice suddenly rose. I'm listening. Pay attention, to your safety. Tilly smiled. Yes, everyone too. She reached out to switch on the radio and changed the frequency to the public channel. She picked up the intercom and said, Attention everyone, the devil beasts have appeared. Proceed according to plan and intercept them, this sky belongs to us. Although there were only 2 Fire of Heaven equipped with a radio, it was enough for 3 squadrons to execute a scissor-style interception. Leader of Team 2, good, understood. Leader of Team 3, Heinz, understood. Now, attack. Tilly stepped on the throttle and led a squadron of 25 Fire of Heaven away from the Seagull's route and flew towards the northwest. Apex M. Chapter 1402. Under the command of the radio, even though they were separated by 1,000 meters, they were still able to act as one. The 3 squadrons, a total of 75 Fires of Heaven, arrived at the interception zone at about the same time and pounced at the Devil Beast troops from 3 different directions. Their trajectories were like a crisscross scissors that instantly severed the enemy's formation. The largest aerial battle of the Battle of Divine Will thus far had begun above the impassable mountain range in the kingdom of Wolfheart. For a moment, the roar of the demons and the roar of the engines resounded throughout the mountain range. The devil beasts that were struck spiraled downwards, and regardless of how powerful their pilots were, they could only helplessly allow their bodies to plummet, eventually turning into a blue speck on the ground. After the 2 parties crossed paths, the originally neat formation no longer existed. According to the flight manual, the Air Knight had to quickly shake off the enemy's pursuit and use the advantage of speed to widen the distance before turning around to launch another round of attacks. Fire at will, fire at will. Tilly took the lead after issuing the command, relying on the Phoenix's abundant propulsion to charge out of the battle. Probably because the color of the Phoenix's fuselage was too striking, a few devil beasts followed her path and chased after her, which was something she had long expected. If she could attract more enemies, the pressure on her teammates would lessen. As long as she could create enough space, the Air Knight troops would be more suited for aerial battles than the devil beasts. Your Highness, be careful. A big guy has its eyes on you. Good's warning sounded from the earpiece. Don't worry, I can see it. Tilly turned her head and swept a glance. Pay attention to your position, I'll call for reinforcements. As the Phoenix's various capabilities far surpassed the fire of heaven and the fire of heaven, she did not provide herself with a wingman. Apart from having confidence in the Phoenix, there was no biplane that could keep up with her, so a solo battle would allow her to display her capabilities. Tilly rode the wind and was the first to ascend and turn. The pursuing devil beasts were still flapping their wings with all their might in an attempt to close the distance between them. When both parties faced each other once again, the enemies clearly did not realize that they had turned from pursuers to prey. The Phoenix swooped down and Tilly decisively pressed down on the firing button. With such a good firing range, she did not even need to use the machine guns on the wings to calibrate the shots. Four dazzling beams of light shot out from the nose of the Phoenix, drawing beautiful arcs in the air and piercing straight into the devil beast horde. Ever since she raised the issue of the insufficient firepower of the 8mm general-purpose machine gun to strafe ground targets, Roland had pushed the production of larger caliber weapons to the agenda. As a specialized machine that possessed all sorts of top-notch technologies, the Phoenix was naturally the first to taste the sweetness. In the massive nose of the Phoenix were four 20mm cannons arranged symmetrically on the left and right, firing rate of nearly 7,000 rounds per minute, allowing its destructive capabilities to reach an unprecedented level. Although her target this time was not the Mad Demon or the Spider Demon, the Devil Beast was obviously larger than the others, indicating that its master was a senior demon. Devil Beast horde of Devil Beasts was that of. And of Devil Beasts. When the beams of light approached the devil, the latter released a furious roar. Several layers of blue shields immediately enveloped it, as though it had donned a set of sturdy armor. When the beams of light approached the devil, the latter released a furious roar. Several layers of blue shields immediately enveloped it, as though it had donned a set of sturdy armor. But just a moment later, the armor faded, shattered, and disintegrated at a speed visible to the naked eye amidst the sparks flying everywhere. Then, the huge impact sent the armor flying and tumbling to the ground. At this height, without fusing with a magic stone of flight or other life-saving talismans, it was impossible for the devil to survive. The devil beast that had lost its master panicked and wanted to flee the battlefield, but Tilly did not give it the chance. She adjusted the angle of the Phoenix's nose and fired a barrage of shells at it. At this moment, the distance between the two was less than 10 meters. The flesh and blood that was torn apart by the barrage of bullets had even splattered onto the Phoenix's windshield. Looking at the bloodstains, Tilly curled her lips and felt extremely carefree. The sky was the stage for her revenge. She yearned for more. The wails of the gigantic devil beast before its death had attracted a new batch of enemies. The demons had also realized that the red iron bird was much faster and more powerful than the other iron birds. It was undoubtedly their greatest obstacle. From the attire of the devil beasts, there were at least 2 or more senior demons. In the era of the Union, they were the generals of the army or the corps of an assault. But now, they had been assigned to ordinary troops. In a certain sense, it was enough to reflect the strength of the demons. But Tilly did not feel the slightest bit of fear. On the contrary, she felt a ball of fire burning in her chest. In the process of regaining her offensive position, she had been staring at the opposing senior demon, while the latter was also staring at her. Tilly could clearly sense that their actions were much more cautious, no longer as casual and contemptuous as before. She licked her lips and fiercely pressed down on the control stick. Come. Truly, pleasing to the eye. Mask stood on the plains outside the city, gazing at the distant battlefield as he let out a light chuckle. Silent Disaster glanced at him in surprise. Are you curious as to why I am so interested in worms? Mask turned his head, and the many stacked masks let out an ear-piercing grinding sound. No, there's no harm in telling you. What determines the quality of a race isn't the inferior races, but the outstanding individuals who grasp the knowledge. What I admire is not the worm that drives the iron bird, but the person who understands the principles behind the iron bird. Mask spread his arms wide. Even if they are of the same race, the difference between the two is like heaven and earth. The former is a worm, while the latter is a human. To be able to combine a bunch of metal inanimate objects and create a rhythm that is not inferior to that of life, don't you think that in itself is something full of charm? I really want to chop off the head of such a person and savor it. Silent Disaster looked away speechlessly. But that is something to be considered in the future. Mask sighed regretfully at not being able to resonate with the other party. The first thing to do now is to disperse these annoying worms. He took out a pocket-sized magic power core and injected it with magic power. The core quickly bloomed in circles. Following that, the ground beneath his feet trembled. A gigantic steel broke out from the ground as cracked black rocks fell from above, producing crackling sounds. One end of the steel was still buried underground, while the other end was raised high and pointed towards the sky. After the dust settled, through the translucent outer walls, one could see the symbiotic demon's blood vessels and meridians all over the steel. Magic power glimmered endlessly, causing the steel to look like a living creature. And there was more than one such steel. As though they had received an order, more steels appeared around the deity of gods. I will use the battle of divine will to prove that knowledge is far superior to brute force. The so-called magic power is just a part of knowledge. Mask stood under the shadow of the steel and raised the shining core high in his hand. And I, Nasapel, am the most worthy lord of the race. Chapter 1403. What the hell, what's that? Lightning, who had been circling not far from the deity of gods, immediately noticed the strange phenomenon. Coo, they dug out the stone pillars buried in the ground? Maggie asked after staring for a long time. Looking down from the sky, those pitch-black things did indeed look like standing pillars, but it was a little too strange that they were only standing halfway. Furthermore, they were neatly encircling the floating island in a circle, so it did not look like they were there for no reason. An extremely uneasy feeling welled up in Lightning's heart. She immediately activated the two sigils and said, "This is the exploration team. We've captured an anomaly on the floating island. I repeat, an anomaly has occurred on the target." Phoenix copy, Tilly quickly replied. "I've also noticed the dust rising from above. Please continue monitoring, I will inform the Aerial Night Squadron to be on high alert." "This is the Seagull." Andrea was the second to speak. "Can you describe in detail what you've seen?" Lightning organized her words and said, "A few black pillars rose from the edge of the land, seemingly similar to the towers in the demon cities. I'm not sure what they are, but they're definitely not small." At this moment, she was suddenly stunned. A stone pillar flickered with a dazzling blue light, and the light seemed to be emitted from within, illuminating its crystal-like outer walls. Following that, something shot out from the stone pillar at lightning speed and flew straight into the sky. "Those pillars are hollow inside, Coo!" Maggie exclaimed. "Ah! What hollow?" Andrea was still confused. Lightning had already screamed at the top of her lungs. "Fleet, quickly evacuate." That object flew past them at an extremely fast speed, following a long parabola and landing in the area where the two sides were fighting. This time, she could clearly see that the object that had been thrown was also a stone pillar. Its shape was no different from the needle the spider-shaped monstrous beast had shot out, except that its size was many times larger. At the same time, it was enveloped in an obvious magic power fluctuation, and under the high-speed flight, it looked like ripples of light being blown by the wind. Faced with the sudden attack, both sides panicked for a moment. They turned around and dove down, hoping to avoid the incoming attack in the shortest time possible. In the vast sky, both the fire of heaven and the devil beasts were insignificant dots. The distance of more than 10 kilometers also extended the flight time of the stone pillar. It pierced through the battlefield and smashed a devil beast that was obviously injured and slowed down into pieces before falling straight to the ground. "That's it?" Lightning was taken aback. From such a long distance, an astonishingly large stone pillar had neither exploded nor shattered into a rain of stone needles. Could it be that the enemy was hoping to shoot down all the fires of heaven with this attack? What was the difference between this and using a wooden stick to hit a mosquito? However, before she could breathe a sigh of relief, Maggie had already used his claws to push her head towards the direction of the pillar. "Look there, Koo!" When Lightning's eyes met the camouflage platform with the model of the Longsong cannon, she suddenly understood. The demon's target had been the cannons from the start. The stone pillar smashed into the formation and exploded with a dazzling blue light. Just the impact alone caused a snow mist to rise several meters high on the hilltop, and the dull sound was no less than the roar of the cannons. Due to its large size, the stone pillar did not stop immediately. Instead, it rolled forward for nearly 100 meters, crushing everything in its path into pieces. In a flash, the formation was in a mess. Lightning sucked in a cold breath. If this was a blocking formation, wouldn't it be a disaster? "Lightning, hurry up and reply." "What happened down there?" Andrea asked anxiously. "Is Tilly in danger?" "No, the fleet is safe for now, but you'd better not disturb her." Lightning looked at the battlefield in the sky. After the stone pillar, both sides were reorganizing their formation. Clearly, the battle was not over. Then, she turned her gaze back to the camouflage formation with a solemn expression and said in a low voice, "But the ground troops. I'm afraid they're in trouble." That was not an ordinary stone pillar. Amidst the snowy fog, the blue light grew dimmer and dimmer until it completely disappeared. At the same time, the surface of the pillar peeled off piece by piece, revealing the flesh and blood structure inside. She vaguely saw something crawling out from inside. "Did you see that?" Lightning patted her head. Maggie raised her head and stared at the ground for a while. "Yes, it's a spider demon, Koo." "A small spider demon, Koo." Cat's Claw and Jop also witnessed the destruction of the camouflage formation. Although their vision was limited and they did not clearly see what fell from the sky, the rising snow on the opposite hilltop and the reverberating rumble showed that the 18 kilometers distance was no longer safe in front of the mobile stronghold. If the demons could hit the bait point, they could also hit them. "Captain, the enemy is in range." On the other side of the hidden fortification, the observer alerted. No signs of the floating island turning. All 3 cannons can fire directly. Cat's Claw bit his lips and exchanged glances with Jop. Firing the cannons now was undoubtedly a huge risk, but if they were to retreat directly, the aerial knight's heroic struggle and the command's arrangements would become meaningless. "Sometimes, we don't need to consider the usefulness of our actions." Jop nodded slowly. Fear was no big deal. Failure was the same. The most important thing was to fulfill their duty as a soldier. And their duty was to fire the cannons. Cat's Claw took a deep breath, jumped out of the window, and blew the whistle. "Everyone, get into position immediately and finish firing before the enemy can react. Hurry, hurry, move. Let the aerial knight see who's the real trump card." In an instant, a large number of people surged out from the previously empty position. The snow-white camouflage cloth was removed, revealing the cold glint of the cannons below. Unlike wooden models, these weapons of war made of steel had an overbearing and oppressive aura at all times. Without needing Cat's Claw to urge them, everyone had already finished loading the cannons, hanging the ropes, and other preparatory work. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, completely different from when they faced the Longsong Knight years ago. That's right, he was not the only one growing. This army had become a force that could decide the fate of mankind. "Reporting, number 1, number 2, and number 3 cannons are ready." Cat's Claw looked at the mountain-like floating island in the distance and spat fiercely. "Fire!" The deafening roar instantly ignited the mountaintop. The flames spewing from the cannons became the dazzling stars in the mountains. Chapter 1404. There was no need to fire, nor was there a need to adjust the direction. What the assault team needed to do was to fire as many shells as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. Everyone displayed all the skills they had learned from their daily training. Even though the design to distribute the ammunition reduced the rate of fire, the elite artillerymen maintained the standard of 4 shots per minute for the 3 cannons. The minute difference between the cannons created a feeling of an endless flow, and the repeated booms that echoed through the mountains resembled a midsummer thunderstorm. "They're firing, Coo." Maggie could not help but hug Lightning's head. "Yeah." The latter responded softly, but she was worried for the First Army. They must have seen the destruction of the disguised position, but even so, the assault team chose to carry out the mission to the end, and it was evident that they were determined. Therefore, she had to fulfill her responsibility and complete this investigation mission well. Although there were not many cannons, the firepower was not lacking. The enemy probably did not expect that the deity of gods would suffer a counterattack from the humans. When the scattered shells landed around the town, many of the demons could be seen fleeing in panic. Clearly, other than the large number of troops garrisoned in the mobile stronghold, there were also a large number of inferior demons. In addition, Lightning could vaguely see the figures of humans in the red mist. This also confirmed the General Staff's conjecture that the demons were purposefully moving the population of the region of control. But she didn't feel too regretful. Greycastle's propaganda and evacuation had been going on for more than half a year. Most of the nobles who still insisted on staying in the Kingdom of Everwinter were vassals of the nobles, and those nobles were the most determined to oppose me. They would rather arm themselves against their own kind than resist the demon's rule. In Miss Edith's words, they only had their own interests in their eyes, and did not hesitate to sell out the future of their race. As the deity of gods continued to push forward, the shells fired from the cannons reached the center of the city. But due to the high concentration of the red mist, Lightning found it difficult to observe the results of the bombardment. Sylvie was currently on the Seagull and could call for help at any time, but there might be demons hidden in the demon city. The moment their eyes crossed, the Seagull's position would be exposed. Now that the battle had lasted for so long, the uneasiness in Lightning's heart had not dissipated. She always felt that the demon's long-prepared attack would not end so soon. Just as he was hesitating, the deity of gods suddenly started revolving. Another tall stone pillar was pointed in the direction of the cannons. Lightning's heart sank. The moment she had been worried about had finally come. The Longsong cannons and the Seagull were not enough to stop the enemy's projectiles, and the aerial knight was still fighting with the devil beasts. It was inevitable that their position would suffer a fatal blow. "Maggie, I'll leave the investigation to you," she gritted her teeth. "Goo." Lightning did not explain further. She threw the pigeon above her head up high and then swooped down, accelerating to the speed of sound midway. The ground troops were not equipped with the sigil of listening, so she was the only one who could deliver the warning in time. The distance of thousands of meters was covered in the blink of an eye, and on the other side, a huge stone pillar rose into the sky with a magical radiance. "Everyone, hide!" Lightning slowed down as she flew over the position and shouted with all her might. "The enemy has already noticed us. The stone pillar will arrive soon, quickly find a place to hide." "It's Miss Lightning." Cat's Claw whistled. "Everyone, leave the cannons immediately." "This is an order, leave the cannons immediately." Upon receiving the order, the cannoneers turned around and ran for cover as fast as they could. At this moment, the shadow of the stone pillar had already appeared in the center of the position. After everyone in sight had retreated, Cat's Claw ran for the nearest hidden sentry post. At the same time, the blue pillar smashed into the Longsong cannons with the force of 1,000 kilograms. The strong impact caused the entire mountain to tremble, and the cannons that suffered the direct impact were reduced to scattered parts. But this time, the stone pillar did not roll over the position, but instead smashed a huge hole in the ground. It was the result of a portion of the trenches and underground cover collapsing. Cough cough. Cat's Claw coughed as he crawled out from the pile of snow. The violent tremors that spread from the soles of his feet to the rest of his body was definitely not pleasant. For a split second, he felt as though his internal organs had shifted positions. But fortunately, other than his legs that were still trembling, his entire body was fine. "Check the casualties, then retreat according to the plan." Cat's Claw grabbed a soldier and ordered, "Pass on my words." "Yes, sir." "Jop, where are you?" "Cough." I heard you, answer me. He raised his head and shouted a few words, but the clear sound of a machine gun firing entered his ears. What's going on? Could it be that the enemy has attacked the mountain? Before Cat's Claw could figure out the situation, Lightning's warning sounded once again. Be careful, the stone pillar is hiding a demon. That is the enemy's true attack method. Hiding a demon. Cat's Claw hurriedly took out the rifle from his back, unlocked the safety, and ran towards the predetermined retreat point. The artillery squad spent most of their time behind the defensive line, so they were rarely equipped with guns. But in consideration of the risk of a close-range attack, not only did every soldier receive a gun, but 2 flintlock squads were also deployed as guards. The first to react were obviously the group of experienced gunmen. When the flying snow settled, Cat's Claw discovered that a few machine gun squads had already used crossfire to seal off the area from the entrance to the center of the position. And the enemy was a type of small spider demon that he had never seen before. They crawled out from the open stone pillar, braving the hail of bullets as they charged towards the defensive line. This type of spider demon was only half the height of a human, and its appearance was similar to the heavily armored spider demons that appeared in the northernmost port. Its head and front legs were covered with thick black stone slabs, and it would not suffer much damage even if it were to take 1 or 2 bullets head-on. Its movements were also rather nimble. Apart from that, it could also spit stone needles like a normal spider demon for long-range attacks, but it needed to open the stone armor on its head before shooting, which gave the soldiers a chance to deal a fatal blow. After Cat's Claw met up with the flintlock squad, he set up his rifle and joined the interception battle. Although it was unclear how many of these monsters were hidden within the stone pillars, this mountain path was the only entrance and exit in the plan. The comrades who could still move would naturally gather here, and regardless of whether they were rescuing the wounded or waiting for reinforcements from the reserve troops, they had to guard this checkpoint. Pay attention to the condition of your gun barrels, don't keep pulling the trigger. Ammo, we need ammo here. Anti-demon grenades, take note, fire. The surrounding shouts and the clicking of the machine guns merged into one, and there were already a few spider demons that had completely stopped moving. Cat's Claw emptied a clip of bullets and replaced it with a new one. He noticed that although the monstrous beasts were far more durable than the mad demons, they were still unable to move an inch in the face of concentrated firepower. The obsidian armor on their bodies could not completely withstand the penetration of bullets, and if it was exposed to the net of firepower, it would quickly crack and break. If 1 bullet was not enough, then he would use 10, or even 100. For the well-equipped assault troops, it was not difficult to accomplish this. Furthermore, the storm-like attacks could greatly suppress the enemy's mobility. The main defenses of the small-sized spider demons were concentrated on their torso, head, and forelimbs, and their rapid movements would expose the fragile armorless areas inside. Thus, they could only advance slowly against the barrage, which gave the anti-demon grenades the best opportunity to fire. After understanding the enemy's characteristics and patterns, they would use machine guns to seal off the enemy's movements, and then use the grenades to kill them in one shot. This became a highly efficient and economical method of battle. However, the greatest weakness of these spider demons was their backs. A woman with short blonde hair swooped down from the sky and flew above the enemies like a ghost. She held 2 pistols and opened fire at the spider demons. Probably to ensure its agility, the rear of the spider demons was almost defenseless. They were no different from mad demons. Even a bullet from a pistol could easily tear apart the thin skin and mash up the central nervous system. Every time she succeeded, there would be a burst of enthusiastic cheers from the defensive line. Most people were very familiar with this agile figure. That was the Miss Lightning they were so proud of. Vertex M. Chapter 1405. The demon's attack was suppressed. Although the black stone pillars were shockingly large, judging from the complex internal structure, the number of small spider demons it could carry wasn't endless. Moreover, the assault troops were equipped with a complete set of weapons, with more than 20 general-purpose machine guns. The fire weaved from such a distance could be described as airtight. As time went by, the number of people gathered at the retreat point quickly exceeded 300, which was close to the total number of the assault troops. The small number of casualties came from the evacuation process. After being separated by the stone pillars that pierced into the center of the formation, the group of people further away from the mountain path would undoubtedly be under greater pressure. Apart from the threat of the spider demons, the friendly fire was equally dangerous. They could only lower their bodies as much as possible and fire at the enemies while circling around from the flanks. Fortunately, after the popularization of tracer bullets, the suppression efficiency and precision of the machine gun teams could not be mentioned in the same breath as in the past. Under the guidance of the flowing flames, the main shooter could clearly and accurately choose the target he wanted to hit. At the very least, he wouldn't be unaware that his bullet had deviated far from the battlefield like in the past. Of course, the most important point was undoubtedly Lightning's timely warning. If they were hit by the flying stone pillars while firing, the casualties of the troops wouldn't be this low. Thus, when she slowly landed, she won a unanimous and enthusiastic applause from everyone. However, Lightning's expression did not relax in the slightest. "Where's the commander of the troops?" "I'm the person in charge of this operation, Cat's Claw." Cat's Claw stepped forward and bowed to the little girl. "This time, it's all thanks to you. You must immediately organize a retreat," Lightning said quickly. The black stone pillars that destroyed the camouflage previously had a large number of spider demons hidden in them, and they are currently rushing over here. Also, there are many launching devices on the floating island. The enemies can throw out new stone pillars at any time. Cat's Claw was shocked after hearing this. Now that the bombardment mission had been completed, the next step was to retreat according to the plan. However, the method of retreat was obviously different. He originally wanted to clean up the remaining enemies in the formation and then bring all of his comrades out of the impassable mountain range, dead or alive. However, it seemed that the situation was worse than he expected. The two bases were not far away from each other and were connected by a road halfway up the mountain. If Lightning's intelligence was correct, the longer they stayed on the top of the mountain, the more likely they would encounter the spider demons on the way. The mountain trail was different from the witches' leveled positions. It was narrow enough for two people to walk side by side. Coupled with the influence of snow and the slope, it was almost impossible to set up an effective line of defense. There were only two choices for them. They could either immediately descend the mountain and occupy the fork halfway up the mountain before the spider demons arrived, or they could call for reinforcements to intercept the enemies. The problem was that there were more than 2 or 3 stone pillar launchers mentioned by Lightning. If the location of the reinforcements was exposed, they were likely to be targeted and bombarded. After all, the reinforcements had more than 800 people and looked more like the main force. Thus, the safest way was to inform them to stay put and rely on their own strength to block the enemy. However, being rational was being rational. It wasn't an easy decision to make. Right now, there were still 20 to 30 people missing. Perhaps they were injured and unable to move, or perhaps they were still looking for opportunities behind the stone pillars. Once the troops left, these people could only look for a chance of survival on their own. There was also Jop, who had yet to show himself. For a moment, Cat's Claw was in a trance. "Captain!" Someone beside him reminded him. He suddenly regained his senses. That's right, he was the person in charge of this troop. Regardless of the time, completing the mission was his first priority. His current mission was to bring as many soldiers of the First Army out of the impassable mountain range. Liaison, inform the reinforcements through the phone. Let them continue to remain hidden. Cat's Claw gritted his teeth and ordered, "The rest of you, immediately evacuate the position. We will meet at the fork halfway up the mountain." After that, he took out a horn and blew the sound of a rapid retreat. Under this command, the flintlock troops that were in charge of protection would split into several batches and cover the scattered artillery troops as they moved down the mountain until everyone left. "Miss Lightning, can I ask for a favor?" After issuing the order, Cat's Claw looked at Lightning. "Those soldiers who are temporarily unable to approach this side, don't worry, leave it to me." Lightning already knew what he wanted to say from his expression. "Please." Cat's Claw saluted again and began to organize the artillery troops to evacuate to the next assembly point. This is the work you're so proud of. Silent Disaster tilted his head to glance at Mask. Even though Mask did not speak, Nasapel felt as though he was mocking him. The resistance of the insectoids was much more intense than he had expected. Even though the distance between them had been reduced to a point where they were almost face to face, the flame extinguisher symbiote was still unable to finish off all the resistance. This left him in a difficult position, especially after he declared the supremacy of knowledge in front of them. One had to know that the new symbiote was named Flame Extinguisher to prove that his creation had the ability to overwhelm the humans' fire branches, fire crossbows, and fire rain. However, the insectoid troops had not only blocked the first wave of defying flames, they had now formed a defensive line halfway up the mountain, blocking the second wave of small-sized symbiotes outside the mountain path. This outcome was unacceptable to Nasapel. His creation was clearly stronger than the primal demons. Not only did it have both offense and defense, it was not restricted by red mist, and it did not fear death. It would never tire before exhausting its magic power. It could be said to be the perfect weapon of war. If it had been invented a few hundred years earlier, the Union would not have had to flee. Ignoring the fertile plains, they could even push all the way to the southernmost island of the Land of Dawn. But it was the first time the flame extinguisher was put into actual combat, and its performance was not much better than the primal demons. How could it not infuriate him? There are many symbiotes in the deity of gods. I want to see how long these insectoids can resist. Senior Lord Mask raised the magic power core in his hand once again. Silent Disaster grabbed his arm. Are you trying to say that magic power is limited? Nasapel said with great displeasure. He hated the use of strength to interfere with others, instead of using logic to reason with others. Blood Conqueror was the same, Sky Lord was the same, but he never expected the Silent Disaster to be the same as well. Indeed, the reason why the improved Spear symbiote demon was able to throw such an astonishing weight was inseparable from the powerful magic power provided by the modified obelisk. Every time it was launched, it consumed a large amount of magic power. If it were to be launched consecutively in a short period of time, it would affect the deity of God's flight. In addition, it would accelerate the aging of the god's stone mine beneath the obelisk, indirectly shortening the lifespan of the deity of gods. But if we don't eliminate these insectoids, wouldn't it encourage their stubborn arrogance? Don't forget that the insectoids that Haxord brought up are also paying attention to this battle. For the sake of our race's plans, we have to defeat them no matter what. Let me go. Silent Disaster replied concisely. Following the direction she pointed, Mask was taken aback. You plan on launching it along with the spear? I've done a few experiments, and the moment that thing lands, it's enough to crush the living body in its stomach. Even if it's wrapped in a cushioning sac, it will be difficult to preserve its life. Only a portion of the symbiote demons can withstand such a huge impact. But you haven't tested it with me, right? Silent Disaster walked towards the steel without looking back. Haxord isn't here now. If anything happens, I won't save you. The other party waved his hand, as though he did not take the warning to heart. Mask had no choice but to turn the core and control the spear symbiote demon to open the outer shell. Just as Silent Disaster was about to burrow into the steel, Mask called out to her. Hey, don't die. Silent Disaster raised his arm, only to see a piece of white fabric wrapped around his arm. It looked like a piece of cloth from a robe. Mask frowned. Few people in the race would put the effort into adornment. The thin white clothes made him think of the Valkyries that were commonly seen in the presiding Holy See. I won't die before I kill all the humans, he replied slowly before disappearing into the steel. Chapter 1406. Be careful, the descent from here on will be faster. If you're afraid, you can close your eyes. After Lightning finished her warning, she carried a Greycastle soldier and flew over the edge of the mountain. The moment their feet were suspended in the air, the two of them abruptly plummeted down and only managed to stabilize themselves after falling dozens of meters. When they landed on the ground again, the soldier's face was pale. Thank you, Miss Lightning. Blurg, take a few more breaths and rest. You'll recover. After that, she flew back to the mountaintop and continued to search for more stragglers. Just as Cat's Claw had predicted, after the stone pillar pierced into the ground, some of the soldiers were separated on the other side of the battlefield and were subsequently scattered by the spider demon's attacks. Even though a portion of them had successfully passed through the blockade and met up with the guards at the assembly point, there were still some who were trapped and unable to move. They were either unwilling to abandon their wounded comrades or were locked in a bitter battle by a few spider demons. As a result, they were unable to retreat immediately after hearing the bugle call. Now that the majority of the troops had begun to retreat in batches, Lightning's appearance had undoubtedly given them a glimmer of hope. Even though her advancement into adulthood did not increase her ability to carry loads by much, being 10 meters above the ground was enough for her to bring people out of danger. The only drawback was that she could only transport one person at a time. Furthermore, when she leaped over the cliff, there would be a large drop. For Lightning, who was used to diving at high speeds, it was nothing much, but for the soldiers she was carrying, it was a real fall. The gunshots on the battlefield gradually subsided. It was obvious that there were not many demons or assault troops left. Lightning had also found about 10 people one after another and placed them on a small path behind the slope. Phew, this is the last one. She let out a long sigh after putting down the newly found stragglers. You should be able to find your own way down the mountain, right? Thank you for your help. Everyone saluted one after another. May I know where the majority of the troops are now? They're on the other side of the mountain, blocking the spider demons from the north. Lightning roughly explained the situation. There's no way to go around this side. You can just descend the mountain and try to reach the metal stone ridge before the floating island crosses the impassable mountain range. So that's how it is. We understand. Everyone's expression couldn't help but be somewhat heavy. The only reason they were able to endure until the rescue was built on the heroic sacrifice of their companions. Now, the majority of the troops were still fighting the enemy, but they were unable to contribute their own strength. This mixed emotion of sadness and unwillingness appeared on everyone's faces. But no matter how regretful they were, they understood that not dragging the main force down was the only thing they could do. By the way, Miss Lightning. Just as they were about to part ways, the soldier who had vomited said hesitantly, when that stone pillar fell, it collapsed the concealed fortifications of the third cannon. I saw a few soldiers hiding in that area. I don't know if there are any survivors. Fortification number 3. Lightning nodded. I'll go and have a look. Watching as everyone turned around and retreated down the mountain, she soared into the sky and arrived at the camp in the blink of an eye. At the same time, Maggie sent her a new warning through the sigil of listening. Be careful, Koo. The demons are about to launch the third pillar. Can you determine where it will land? I'm not sure, but it shouldn't be the top of the mountain, Koo. Maggie's voice suddenly trembled. The stone pillar is coming, Koo. Lightning suddenly soared into the sky, only to see the black pillar drawing a high arc and flying straight towards the impassable mountain range. Since the demons weren't aiming at the blocking position, then it was very likely that they were retreating at the foot of the mountain. The terrain there was difficult to spread out, and if the spider demons rushed into the crowd, the casualties would definitely increase. The only good news was that there were undulating hills on both sides of the road, so it was almost impossible for the demons to accurately land on top of the troops. She immediately made a decision and decided to first support the blocking force at the halfway point. At this moment, Sylvie, who was on the seagull, suddenly opened her eyes. Oh my God, what happened? Andrea asked in surprise. In order to avoid being discovered by the demons, Sylvie had kept her eyes closed. In theory, she shouldn't have been able to see what was happening below the clouds. It's a strong magic reaction. Andrea murmured in disbelief. It's quickly approaching the impassable mountain range. Magic reaction? Andrea was slightly taken aback. This reminded her of the cursed demon, Osruk. In the last battle of the tequila, he had used a substitute to release magic to deliberately lure the ambush team. However, the disguised source of magic was not exactly the same as the real body. Sylvie might not be able to distinguish the details at a distance of more than 10 kilometers, but at this distance, she should be able to distinguish the source from the fake. In other words, what the eye of magic caught was most likely a genuine senior demon. Although it was not clear why the enemy chose to reveal its identity at this time, since it had already made its move, the seagull would not just stand by and watch. From the beginning, their targets were the most difficult to deal with on the battlefield. Andrea had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Next, it's our turn to perform. But Sylvie stared at the bottom of the cabin, her forehead beaded with sweat. Is this really a demon? How can its magic be so strong? How strong? Far stronger than Osruk, Sylvie bit her lip. I'm afraid only when Leaf is in the state of the heart of the forest. What did you say? Andrea was stunned. She had seen how strong Leaf's magic was when she occupied a corner of the misty forest. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was vast, but that was the effect achieved by assimilating foreign objects. Just one person could reach this level. Hey. Can you be any more exaggerated? Vendi immediately activated all the sigil of listening. Your Highness Tilly, Lightning, Maggie, this is the seagull. Sylvie has detected a new enemy approaching the mountain range. From the magic reaction, it is very likely that the enemy is a senior lord level higher ascendant. Do not fight it head on. Then what do we do? Shavi asked timidly. Do you still need to ask? Andrea clenched her fist. Only this kind of guy is worth the bullet in my hand that has fused with my sister's blood. Boom. The third stone pillar passed through the gap between two mountain peaks and swept through a large forest before finally sliding down the slope to the bottom of a valley. Behind it, the soil and tree roots that were lifted up formed a dark brown, wide path that formed a stark contrast with the surrounding snowy landscape. Cat's Claw heaved a sigh of relief. Ordering a quick retreat was obviously the right decision. The interval between the stone pillars' shots was much longer this time, and the enemies that attacked from halfway up the mountain were mostly eliminated. The time difference they had gained was enough to deal with the new enemy. Moreover, the position where the stone pillar landed was right between them and the reserve team. The difference in height between the two not only provided a good shooting range for the shooters, but also allowed them to arrange their firepower at a distance of more than 1,000 meters. At least they did not have to face the enemy hastily like before. It was a pity that they did not have 75mm field cannons for this operation. Otherwise, they could have directly fired at the giant stone pillar at the bottom of the slope and exterminated those damn stone crawlers before they could even show their heads. /1_ Chapter 1407. Captain, they're climbing up. Fire when they're closer. We don't have as many bullets as the machine gun squad. Cat's Claw found a suitable shooting position and set up his van, a rifle. While waiting for the enemy, he did not forget to glance at the floating island's position. He did not know if it was an illusion, but the floating island seemed to be rising. Previously, he could barely see its edges, but now, he could only see its sharp belly. But one thing was for sure. During this period of time, the stronghold had moved closer to the impassable mountain range. The huge shadow had already climbed up a corner of the mountain range. Cat's Claw's breathing became sluggish when he thought about the possibility of fighting under its shadow, as if a heavy stone was pressing down on his back. He had to quickly get rid of these damned demons and leave the mountain range before the floating island. Just as he thought, when the spider demons climbed into the 500-meter range, the machine gun squad finally released their restrictions and spat out long tongues of fire at the target on the steep slope. For a moment, the forest in the valley boiled over. Cat's Claw pulled the trigger at the 150-meter range where he had the most confidence. Fire! Everyone's muzzles immediately stirred up a snowy mist. Although they were not professional marksmen, they were influenced by Sir Van and were the most proactive in modifying their rifles. In semi-automatic mode, As long as the 5 or 6 Van rifles did not jam, they would be able to explode with power comparable to the machine gun squad. Facing the tough small spider demons, the importance of the intensity of the firepower was raised to a whole new level. If it was the standard equipment of the ordinary First Army, it would not be easy to stop the large number of fearless spider demons. Suddenly, a black light surged out of the forest like a ripple, and in the blink of an eye, it penetrated everyone. It came and went quickly, no more than a second had passed. If not for the slight tremble of his teammates, Cat's Claw would have thought that it was just an illusion. Just now, did you see anything? It looked like a black ripple. Cat's Claw touched his body and did not find anything unusual. The defensive line was not damaged, as could be heard from the continuous gunshots. It's probably from that weird stone pillar, the teammate said as he inserted a new magazine into the gun. These things are strange. They look like stone on the outside, but there's flesh and blood growing on the inside. Cat's Claw did not pursue the matter any further. Compared to the harmless black light, it was more important to get rid of the spider demons that had climbed up. However, he soon discovered that the snowy scenery in front of him was darkening, as if the sun had been blocked. Damn it, could it be that the floating island had already entered the mountain range? He raised his head and looked over. Then, he could not help but be stunned. The stronghold was still in its original position, but the sky had changed. He saw that the previously clear sky was now covered with dark clouds. Golden streams of light shuttled through the clouds as if they were accumulating something. The speed of this change had completely exceeded the scope of a celestial phenomenon. An extremely ominous feeling suddenly arose in his heart. The others also noticed the strange phenomenon above their heads. In just a short span of 10 seconds, the dark clouds had become so dense that they covered the sky. Tens of thousands of streams of light continued to gather at a single point, faintly showing signs of blossoming. I seem to have seen such a scene somewhere before. Cat's Claw suddenly took out a horn and was about to blow it when countless streaks of lightning struck down from the clouds. They fanned out and instantly fell into the defensive line of the assault team. The continuous firepower stopped abruptly. That's a sigil of God's will. On the seagull, Vendi gasped in disbelief. Even if it's not a sigil, I'm afraid it's a similar magic stone, Andrea replied with a solemn expression. Lightning, are you all right? I'm fine, Andrea's slightly hoarse voice came from the sigil of listening. The enemy should have noticed me. Just stay at the side. This is no longer a battle you can intervene in, Andrea warned. The ripple just now was obviously directed at lightning. The witches who had participated in the tequila ambush could not be more familiar with this phenomenon. It was the unique ability of the Magic Slayer. The widespread Magic Slayer's power was definitely the nemesis of agile witches like lightning. Once she was affected, just the inertia of the speed alone would put her in danger. The enemy's plan was undoubtedly to first cut off her ability and then let her fall into the range of the Divine Will's attack like a rock. Fortunately, after hearing Vendi's warning, lightning did not charge forward like before, which gave her the strength to shake off the black ripple. Get Maggie to inform the reserve team. The assault team might be in trouble. Andrea then looked at Sylvie. Can you find the target? The latter took a deep breath. It has already rushed to the top of the slope at an astonishing speed. There are no signs of demons nearby, so we shouldn't have alerted it yet. But the defensive line has already been destroyed by the lightning strike. I'm afraid we won't be able to defend against the follow-up spider demons. This meant that the soldiers were facing the monstrous beast's stone needles at close range. But she had no time to worry about this now. Following Sylvie's instructions, Andrea finally managed to capture the Magic Slayer's figure through the scope. At the same time, her heart also sank. This speed was not just fast, it could even be said to be erratic. If she was just a moment slower, she would completely lose track of him. If she wanted to seize the opportunity to fire, she had to get closer. Otherwise, even if her ability helped her pick out the coin that was bound to hit, the bullet would be long enough for it to fly away from the point of impact. Another point also attracted Andrea's attention. During the chaotic battle with the First Army, the Magic Slayer, who was clad in heavy armor, had almost never produced a blue barrier. This could not be explained by speed alone. While she was observing the target, the dark clouds in the sky did not disperse. Golden lightning once again condensed and fell from the sky. The enemy had used the second divine will. It confirmed Sylvie's warning. In terms of magic power alone, it had unfathomable potential. There was no time to hesitate. Andrea suppressed the doubts in her heart and shouted to Vendi, "We have to go down, just like we did with Hacksword. I can only guarantee that the target won't be able to escape if we get close enough." "How close?" "As long as we don't enter the Magic Slayer's range, the closer the better." "This is difficult." Vendi sighed. "It would be fine if Tilly was the driver, but now that Miss Shavy is controlling it, not only do I have to control the wind on multiple sides, I also have to pay attention to the enemy's condition at all times. This is really not an easy task, is it not possible?" Andrea's heart slightly tightened. "It's not that it's not possible, but I have to concentrate and do my best." She closed her eyes and slowly replied, "Even though I'm old, it shouldn't be a problem to do it once in a while." Andrea was stunned at first, then the corners of her mouth curled up. She could not help thinking of what Lightning had said. Everyone thought that Vendi was an amiable senior, but under her gentle appearance, there was actually a firm and calm heart. If not for this, she would not have been able to destroy the God's Stone of Retaliation in front of Kara and rescue the imprisoned Nightingale. "Shavy, press down on the joystick." Andrea shouted. "We're going." Bookseller's website. Chapter 1408. Seagull's greatest advantage was that it made almost no noise when it accelerated, making it very suitable for ambushing the enemy from behind. Aina, calm. After penetrating through the clouds, the glider bypassed the mountain peaks one after another like a ghost and approached the rear of the battlefield silently. At this moment, the defense line of the blocking troop had been completely broken. The soldiers could only retreat in their own formations while fighting. If it were any other army, they would have long fled when faced with a situation where they had lost their unified command. However, the First Army's situation was still not optimistic. Once they lost their advantage in firepower, the price they had to pay to eliminate the spider demons, who also had long-range attacks, would increase exponentially. Not to mention, there was still the monster-like black-armored demon. With the help of the telescope, Andrea could now see the appearance of the enemy relatively clearly. Other than the strange and exaggerated armor that was covered in veins, it was also holding a huge halberd. No matter how she looked at it, it looked like a heavy armored warrior. However, the agility displayed by the enemy far exceeded that of the charging knight. It could also change direction at any time, as if the armor and weapons on its body were weightless. To Andrea, this was also the most difficult opponent to deal with. "What's the distance now?" 1900 meters. Sylvie's tone was filled with anxiety. "How is it, can you hit it?" "No." She licked her dry lips. "I have to get closer." During this process, Andrea had already silently activated her abilities several times. The overlapping silver lines in her field of vision had increased from the initial 1 or 2 lines to being everywhere. This meant that she had more than 10 ways to fire this shot, as long as the target was sufficiently cooperative. Once she pulled the trigger, the landing point would be determined. During the few seconds of flight, no one knew what the other party would do. If it was an ordinary gun, she could fire continuously and use quantity to eliminate the probability. However, the large-caliber sniper rifle in her hand had an extremely long firing interval. She could not gamble with her precious God's Stone of Retaliation bullets. Therefore, the safest method was to compress the flight time of the bullet as much as possible, so that the target would be stationary in the interval between firing and hitting the target, 1,500 meters. Sylvie could not help but grab the corner of her clothes. "Seagull is changing direction. Be careful of tilting," Vendi reminded. At this distance, it was already possible to distinguish the glider from the large raptor with the naked eye. Although no one would pay special attention to the movements in the sky during the fierce battlefield, all the witches' hearts were in their throats. Even though they knew that the enemy could not hear the sound coming from the sky, they still slowed down their breathing. 1,300 meters. Sylvie shouted. Closer. Andrea placed her finger on the trigger. 1 second was more than enough for most targets, but her opponent was a Grand Lord after all. She didn't want any accidents to happen. 1,100 meters. Shavy, pay attention to the angle of the rod. I can't pull it up anymore. 900. At this moment, Andrea activated her ability. Countless silver lines almost filled his entire field of vision, finally converging into a dazzling pillar of light. At this distance, the influence of wind and gravity was almost negligible. What you see is what you get, she murmured softly, then pulled the trigger. Almost at the same time, the Magic Slayer also sensed the abnormality through the reaction of the First Army soldiers. He suddenly turned around, only to realize that the moment the glider above his head lit up, the God's Stone of Retaliation bullet was already in front of him. No matter how agile it was too late for it to dodge at this moment. With a loud bang, a blast of air exploded in front of the Magic Slayer. The strong impact sent him flying, and the dark clouds in the sky quickly dissipated like snow under the scorching sun. Did it work? Vendi asked anxiously. Sylvie's face was a little pale. No. I'm afraid that shot didn't hit the enemy. How could that be? Andrea clenched her teeth and patted a magic bandage on her shoulder. When I fired the shot, I saw that it didn't notice anything. For a moment, Sylvie did not know how to answer. Her ability could not penetrate the shielding of the God's Stone of Retaliation, so she could not know what had happened in that instant. But she did see that when the black light of the God's Stone of Retaliation bullet approached the Magic Slayer, the surrounding scene slightly distorted, as if there was something between the Magic Slayer and the bullet. Then the black light abruptly broke into several pieces, instead of piercing straight through the Magic Slayer's chest like before. Stop fighting. How's the target? Shavy interrupted. It's getting up. Sylvie said with difficulty. Through the eye of magic, she saw that the attack had left several obvious marks on the black armor, probably caused by the shattered God's Stone of Retaliation. The most obvious damage was on the Magic Slayer's head. Half of the towering steeple helmet was shattered, revealing half of the Magic Slayer's cold face. Regardless of the cause of all this, the fact that the Magic Slayer could still stand was enough to prove the result. Sylvie, help me reload. Andrea shouted. We're out of God's Stone of Retaliation bullets, then use the ordinary ones, she insisted. Since the Magic Slayer can still use his ability in this situation, it doesn't matter if it's a God's Stone of Retaliation bullet. It's fine as long as we can shoot it. The sky is cloudy again. Shavy yelled. Will this guy ever stop? Sylvie pushed the half-arm-long bullet into the barrel. But he's already noticed us. If we try again, that's why I'm firing this shot. Andrea growled. If we run away like this, I'm afraid we won't be able to fly out of this cloud zone. The Magic Slayer stood up again and raised his halberd, his eyes glinting with a ferocious red light. The dull sound of thunder rolled across the entire valley. Reloading complete. Vendi, steady the direction. Andrea aimed at the target. The silver thread once again connected the target to the muzzle. This time, she ignored the stabbing pain in her shoulder and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Perhaps sensing danger, the Magic Slayer leaped to the side and swung his halberd. This time, Sylvie finally saw the true appearance of the distorted objects. They were thin and transparent, resembling cicada wings, but they were definitely not real cicada wings. Molded by magic power, they were superior to any blade and automatically spiraled around the Magic Slayer. Even though the bullet's landing point was empty, they still reacted. A few of them slashed at the trajectory of the bullet, while the rest formed a wall of blades around the senior demon lord. The shockwave from the explosion appeared once again and stirred up a snowy mist. The distorted golden stream of light struck down from the sky and shattered the left wing of the seagull. The glider immediately lost its balance and tumbled towards the foot of the mountain. An hour later, the shadow of the deity of gods enveloped the impassable mountain range. Following the opening of the floodgates at the bottom of the continent, a large number of red mist poured down like a waterfall and flowed through the valley towards the east and west. Silent Disaster took off his battered helmet and bathed in the comfortable and humid air. Even though there were still remnants of the humans resisting, it did not affect the overall situation. After noticing the appearance of new enemy troops, Mask fired another 3 active spears. The other party probably did not expect that there was a hidden shooting tunnel at the bottom of the deity of gods. Furthermore, a direct hit on the stone pillar was far more lethal than a projectile shot. After being crushed by the 3 thick spears, the humans found it difficult to organize an effective counterattack. Following that, the symbiotic demons tirelessly searched for the escapees before their magic power was depleted, until they were all wiped out. The group of iron birds had attempted to cover the retreat of the humans on the ground. One of the red, single-winged birds had caused him quite a bit of trouble. Not only did he fail to shoot down the target several times, he had even exhausted a lot of his magic power from the enemy's strafing. Be it speed or reaction, he far surpassed the other iron birds. But they did not seem to be suited for prolonged combat and were ultimately repelled by him and the winged beasts. Without a doubt, it was a victory for the race. Chapter 1409. Are you still alive? Mask's voice resounded in Silent Disaster's mind. It was an echo of his consciousness from the birth tower. He lowered his head and stared at the dull white robe in his palm. I said before, I will not die before the humans are wiped out. Very good, but don't forget, I, Nasapel, am the one who decides the outcome of this battle. Without the combined attack of the new symbiotic demons and the deity of gods, even if 2,000 or 3,000 primal demons were to enter, they would not be of much use in the rugged foothills. I won't deny that. He probably did not expect Silent Disaster to agree so straightforwardly, as there was a momentary pause. In short, if the king asks about the Western Front, I hope you remember what you said. Also, Haxord has nothing to do with this battle. You have seen it with your own eyes. Although he has his reasons, it is better to be clear about the merits and demerits. I agree. The other party was speechless again. I never expected you to be so reasonable. Then go to the place where the Zerg set up the rain of fire. I will let the deity of gods meet you there. You want to retrieve their weapons? That's right, Nasapel said delightedly. That is the proof of victory, and also an excellent collection for me to explore the mysteries. As they ascended the mountain, the deity of gods had already closed its sluice gates and was slowly descending. Silent Disaster had to admit that Senior Lord Mask was irreplaceable. Standing beneath the floating continent that was wider than the impassable mountain range, anyone would have the misconception that the mountain was about to collapse. But in fact, it would stop the moment it touched the ground, just like how an egg would not shatter under 1,000 tons of weight. Be it the transportation of supplies or the deployment of troops, it was an extremely easy task. Furthermore, even if the deity of gods did not touch the ground, it could use the floating platform to complete the exchange between inside and outside. And the nearly 100 meters of vertical distance was enough to make the enemy sigh, far more than the moat of the past could compare. It could be said that it was an impossible task to capture the deity of gods from the outside. Just as they were waiting for the rendezvous, Silent Disaster suddenly heard a slight sound from beneath her feet. The base had long been abandoned by the humans. Even if there were survivors, the symbiotic demons should have taken care of them. It followed the source of the sound and walked to a cave entrance. That should be a hidden fortification dug out by the other party, but it collapsed under the impact of the active spear, turning the underground tunnel into a cage. The subtle sound came from within. If they didn't do anything, whoever was trapped down there would only be death waiting for them. But Silent Disaster bent down and lifted the collapsed roof with one hand. It did not know why it was doing this. Perhaps it was because it wanted to obtain more information, or perhaps it was because it was infected by the Greycastle people's interest. After a while, it cleared a hole that was wide enough for one person to pass through. The passageway wasn't long. After 2 turns, Silent Disaster reached the end. At the same time, she saw the source of the sound. At the end of the passageway was a relatively spacious room with an oil lamp hanging at the door. Under the dim yellow light, a human male was sitting with his back against the wall, panting heavily. There were many traces of blood on the ground. Silent Disaster noticed that only a few strands of flesh were left on the man's feet. It was likely that he had been crushed by the collapse of the roof and only managed to escape after being severed. But this person should be clear of the structure of the passageway. Even if he abandoned his feet, there was no way he could escape the hidden fortification. If that was the case, why was he struggling? Unfortunately. The male lifted his head and glanced at her. In the end, it was still the devil that came. Tell me what you know. Otherwise, death is just an extravagant wish, Silent Disaster said stiffly. Unlike Valkyries, she had spent most of her time fighting against the Sky-Sea realm ever since she gained consciousness, so she wasn't proficient in the human language. But the other party didn't seem to hear her question. I was thinking, it would be fine if it was a teammate that came, but if it was a devil, wouldn't I be a sitting duck? He smiled weakly. Coincidentally, there was some gunpowder stored here. If it was a detonator, it would be able to fulfill the final responsibility. But I never expected that it would be a big fish. I probably won't be able to get anything out of him. Silent Disaster thought expressionlessly, I'll leave him to Mask to deal with. Just as she was about to knock him out, a hemp rope slipped from the human's hand. The other end of the rope seemed to be connected to a heavy object, and after losing its restraints, it rapidly shot upwards. Only then did Silent Disaster realize that there were many pancake-like objects piled up in the corner of the dark room. A black object silently fell from the low ceiling, and below it was a metal cube. That was also where the blood stains were the most concentrated. No, the other party's struggle wasn't to escape from this place. The oil lamp hanging on the door frame allowed him to see the intruder immediately. The rope in his hand ensured that regardless of whether he lost consciousness or was killed, the trap would be triggered. He dragged his battered body and crawled around the tiny room, all for a chance to not be a sitting duck. Silent Disaster retreated as fast as she could. The male curled his lips. Long live, humans. An extremely dazzling light blossomed from the corner, and in an instant, the dark room was illuminated as though it was daytime. Accompanied by a loud boom, the caved-in area bulged up, as though a gigantic fist had smashed through it from the inside, bringing with it a large amount of rubble and snow that flew into the sky. What's going on? Mask looked at Silent Disaster, who was being carried up the deity of gods, and asked his assistant with a frown. This subordinate isn't sure, I only know that there was a sudden explosion on the mountaintop. He probably fell into the insectoid's trap. Nasapel snorted. What a sorry state. If it were any other senior lord, I'm afraid they would have long stopped breathing. At this moment, Silent Disaster looked as though he had been stepped on by horns. His shattered armor and flesh were mixed together, and the face that resembled a female human was only left with a blurry silhouette. His magic power was almost depleted. Doesn't this prove that your thoughts are correct? The assistant lowered his head. That's right. Nasapel laughed. No matter how powerful the body is, the limit is just this. On the contrary, the symbiotic body is the ideal direction of evolution, it can be replaced at any time after being damaged, and there is no limit to its growth. That is the body we should be pursuing. He no longer looked at the unconscious senior lord, and turned to walk towards the birth tower. Throw this fellow into the red mist pond to soak, there shouldn't be a need for him to take action for a period of time. Those insectoids definitely wouldn't expect that the kingdom of Wolfheart, which is easily obtainable, isn't the primary goal of the deity of gods. Swallowing all the kingdoms in one go is the fastest way to obtain the legacy shard. Pass down my orders, adjust the course, and head towards the Hermes Plateau at full speed. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1410. As expected, it was just a scam. Haxord stood in mid-air and gazed at the northern sea. He had been searching along the coastline of the Land of Dawn for hundreds of kilometers, not only to the end of the ridge of the continent, but also to the two sides of the ridge. As the description in the letter was vague, in order not to miss the legendary bottomless land, he had covered nearly every possible region, stopping only at the Sea of Clouds that connected to the Blackstone region. But even so, he was unable to find the isolated island mentioned in the letter. Thinking about it, there was nothing to block the sea, and in the clear blue sky, he could see everything within 1,000 kilometers. If there really was such a strange island, his race would have seen it when they marched from the Blackstone region to the Land of Dawn. Why would they wait for him to discover it? Haxord could not help but clench his fists. Darned humans, how dare they deceive the Sky Lord? What was even more unforgivable was that they actually used the name of Valkyries. It was impossible for a Nightmare Lord to betray his race, and the only reason why the humans were able to do so was to extract his memories. Even though he did not know when the group of witches obtained such an ability, it was obvious what happened to Valkyries. A wave of indignant anger surged into its chest. He suddenly opened the distortion door and stepped onto the sea. What bottomless land, what realm of mind is right here? It's all bullshit. Haxord roared as he traversed the vast sea, as though he wanted to vent the dissatisfaction that had been accumulating in his heart for a long time. How can the domain that belongs to God be in such an ordinary place? I should have thought of it long ago. Couldn't I have just activated the deity of gods and killed all the humans? Why did I have to take the risk to infiltrate the depths of the realm of mind? Great, a Grand Lord actually became bait for humans to manipulate, and even implicated me to be doubted by the king. How foolish. I will definitely take revenge. Sky Lord suddenly froze in place, still in his roaring state. The surface of the sea that was sparkling just a moment ago had turned hazy and unclear. Unknowingly, a white mist had appeared in the surroundings, causing visibility to drop to a radius of several meters. I barged into the mist. That's not right. Even if it's a ball of mist, I shouldn't have been completely unaware of it. Haxord took a step back, and the sea became clear again. It turned around and saw that the sea was quiet a few miles away, and it could see the end of the sea line. The indignation in his heart suddenly disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was an uncontrollable chill. This place was not too far away from the Land of Dawn and the Blackstone region. In the past hundreds of years, no one had actually noticed this phenomenon. After hesitating for a while, it activated its ability again and entered the sea. But this time, it was much more cautious. After passing through the door, the damp fog quickly enveloped them. Haxord lowered his altitude and slowly moved against the waves. At the same time, he raised his vigilance to the maximum. Not long after, a black shadow vaguely appeared in front of it. It was indeed an island, and judging from its silhouette, it wasn't small at all. It flew to the edge of the island and landed, its feet stepping on the grassy ground. This is the place Valkyries mentioned. Haxord surveyed its surroundings, but other than the fog, it couldn't see anything. After weighing its condition, it decided to search the island on foot. Not long ago, it had just changed its breathing tank, so it still had an ample supply of red mist. There was a supply line for the tribe on the Sea of Clouds, and there were 2 standing sentry posts at the junction of the Land of Dawn and the Blackstone region. With its ability, the possibility of an accident happening was not high. After walking for a few hundred steps, the scenery gradually changed. There were more stone tablets in the grass, and the number was increasing gradually. These things, which were clearly carved by living creatures, meant that the island wasn't a forbidden zone that no one had set foot in. Haxord inspected a few of the tablets and realized that the words on them were not one that he was familiar with. "Hello," someone suddenly said. In that instant, Sky Lord felt his hair stand on end. Without hesitation, he opened a distortion door and leaped into the air. At the same time, he prepared to counterattack. However, the person who spoke did not attack him from behind. It was actually a member of the same tribe. Judging from its appearance, it was at least a high-level ascendant. Its body had completely erased the roughness of a primal demon and a junior demon. It was highly evolved, and even its fingers and hair could be clearly seen. It wore a light white muslin, and its feet were bare. Its hands were behind its back, and its tone and expression were very easygoing. It did not have the sharp aura of a superior at all. "I'm the Senior Lord, Sky Lord. Who are you? And when did you come to the island?" Haxord asked while maintaining a distance. "Is there a supply of red mist here?" "I'm just a guardian." It laughed softly. "As for the time I've been here, I can't remember." "Guardian?" Haxord tried to recall, but he could not find any high-level ascendant with such a title in his memory. As for it being so long that he couldn't remember, that was even more ridiculous. Before the first battle of Divine Will, the tribe had yet to set foot in the northern end of the Land of Dawn. How could it have lived alone on this isolated island? "That's right. That's why I'm not a member of your tribe. I'm not the one who decided on this form, but you," the guardian replied softly. "I know it's hard to understand, but that's the truth." Since it wasn't a member of his tribe, it could be an enemy. Furthermore, Haxord noticed that it wasn't wearing a helmet, and there were no signs of it being connected to a breathing tank. This was equivalent to confirming its words. Therefore, Sky Lord's vigilance increased. "This is the bottomless land? Where's the realm of mind?" The guardian shook its head. "This is only a bridge. A key is needed to open it." "What kind of key?" It paused for a moment, as though in thought. "In your words, a complete legacy item. When the legacy shards were reunited, the path that led to the origin of magic would be revealed." Wasn't this similar to the revelation passed down by the tribe? Haxord immediately felt his heart jolt. He could already tell that this fellow couldn't speak properly. It had to fabricate strange titles to show that it was different from Mask. Be it a bridge or a path, there was a high chance that they were referring to the same thing. Haxord felt that his brain had never operated at such a high speed before. "Can you bring me to see that bridge?" The guardian hesitated for a moment and looked towards the north. "That's possible, but you have to be quick. There's not much time left." After following it for a few minutes, a gigantic pit appeared in front of Haxord. "This is the bridge?" It was taken aback. "Yes. Not everyone can cross this bridge. You don't have the key, so you can't see its existence." "What bridge and path?" The tribe's description isn't any better. This was clearly a sinkhole. But when he thought of the rumors of the bottomless land, it was rather apartment. Then, is the realm of mind at the bottom of the pit? Haxord had absolutely no interest in jumping down to investigate. Since it was said to be bottomless, who knew if he could fly out again? But this did not mean that he had to verify it. He took out a 5-colored magic stone from his armor. According to the underground civilization's research, this item could reflect the relationship between an awakened and the origin of magic. If the bottomless land was really the place where all things were born and ended, then it was impossible for there to be no activity at all. Haxord held his breath and placed the magic stone in front of his eyes. Following that, he saw an extremely dazzling pillar of light. No. To be precise, there were countless of them. They gathered from all directions and finally gathered here, looking like a tree of light that blotted out the sky and the sun. The pillars of light that were evenly scattered around the world formed its crown and branches, and the part that gathered together and shot straight into the bottom of the pit was its trunk. As it was too bright, the trunk's color was almost incandescent. It was almost impossible to look at it directly. Even though he knew nothing about the meaning of the pillars of light, he could feel the shock that came from the depths of his heart. Chapter 14:11. That letter was real. Valkyries was right, the bottom of the pit was the origin of magic that they had been searching for. An extremely complicated feeling surged into Haxord's heart, and it even caused him to be at a loss for a moment. Since some things were real, then some things were naturally fake. For example, the upgrade of the race. In the Book of Revelation, the origin of magic was high above and belonged to the domain of God. No matter how one looked at it, it hinted that it was one with the bloody moon. Races that did not obtain all the inheritances were not qualified to touch that domain. Thus, the sky held a sacred meaning to the race, and the floating mobile city was named the deity of gods. But now, the origin of magic was not that different. It was located on an island with concealment abilities, at the same height as all the other races, or even lower. Similarly, arriving at this place wouldn't bring him any additional benefits. Haxord didn't feel the surging mana, nor did he notice the new changes in his body. If he removed the 5-colored magic stone, this place would just be an ordinary pit. It wouldn't be able to be described as powerful or holy. Welcoming the upgrade of the race in the pit? Even if it was a scam, shouldn't they at least disguise it? If everything was as Edith said, then wouldn't the hard work of the race over the past 1,000 years become a joke? Sky Lord? The Guardian's voice interrupted his thoughts. That's right, there was still a monster that claimed to have been stationed here for thousands of years and could easily disguise as a high-ranking race. From its performance, it was very likely that it knew something about the battle of divine will. After all, the battle for the inheritance was an endless cycle, and it was very likely that it had seen more than one race that had obtained the upgrade key. Perhaps it was even further. All the rumors and revelations regarding the battle of divine will originated from here. Haxord did not expect the Guardian to be honest. He decided to strike first. 2 distortion doors flashed past the Guardian's body and severed its arms from the shoulders, followed by its legs. Before the Guardian could react, it had already lost all 4 limbs. Its expression froze in shock and confusion, then it powerlessly fell to the ground. Haxord had secretly used the 5-colored magic stone to confirm that there was no obvious pillar of light above the Watcher's head, which meant that it was not outstanding in terms of magic power. As long as he cut off its limbs, the threat it posed would be very limited. Even so, Sky Lord remained in midair to observe for a moment. After confirming that the other party could do nothing other than moaning in pain, he returned to the ground and grabbed the Guardian who was lying in a pool of blood. At this moment, its white veil had been dyed blue by blood, and it was no longer as gentle and elegant as before. You'd better answer my question truthfully. That way, I might still be able to save your life, Haxord threatened. What's the final outcome of upgrading? Does God really exist? Why would it set up such a scam? My patience is limited. Tell me everything you know now. Surprisingly, the Guardian's face did not reveal any emotions of fear or hatred. It panted slightly. Why did you do this? Those ruins buried underground were left behind by the competitors of a certain battle of divine will, right? Now, my race is about to follow in the same footsteps and become a speck of dust. You actually dare to ask me why? Fighting and dying like beasts, could it be that this world only exists to please the gods? After growling, Haxord suddenly froze. The Guardian stared at him, and a hint of sorrow appeared in its eyes. I see. You are not lost, but came prepared. Unfortunately, compared to fading away without knowing anything, sometimes knowing the answer is more despairing, especially when you are powerless to change it. This world indeed has many shortcomings, but to you, it is already the best cradle. Cradle? Sky Lord never expected to hear such a term from the other party. The Guardian's aura grew weaker. It lifted its blood-soaked shoulder, as though it wanted to touch Haxord's cheek. You are all God's children, why would it treat you as props to please itself? Now is the time to leave. Leave quickly. Before obtaining the key, do not ever return to this island. You have not answered my question. But before Haxord could finish speaking, the Guardian's figure suddenly began to fade, as though it no longer had the strength to support its current form. In a short span of a few breaths, it disappeared without a trace. And with it, the stone tablets also disappeared. Soon, all that was left was lush green grass and an endless pit. Everything that had just happened was like an illusion. But the traces of blood on Haxord's hand told him that the female, higher ascendant, had indeed existed. What made him even more puzzled was that the other party was clearly in disguise, but when she really disappeared, it made him feel a sense of loss. Haxord shook its head, suppressing the surging thoughts to the bottom of its heart. At the very least, it had confirmed one point. Valkyries was still alive, and was closer to the truth of the Battle of Divine Will than anyone else. The next thing to do was to find a stable channel to communicate with the Nightmare Lord. It had too many questions to ask her. Hacksword stood up, and just as he was about to leave, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. What exactly happened? It lowered its head and saw a diamond-shaped hole in its armor, and a sharp bone claw gradually revealed itself. This was the Sky Sea Realm's blade. They were almost transparent when they moved, and were extremely stealthy. Only magic perception could detect their existence. Damn it! While I was distracted, the Sky Sea Realm actually infiltrated this island? Hacksword felt its strength rapidly depleting. It had been careless. It had focused all its attention on the Guardian, and the latter's unexpected reply had distracted its vigilance. As a result, it had failed to detect the enemy hidden in the thick fog. But what it did not understand was that in the past, such an enemy would never have been able to break through the barrier of a higher ascendant, much less pierce through the armor on its body. The blade was just a claw used by the Nest Eye to hunt. Apart from being stealthy, it was practically useless. When did it become a threat to a senior lord? The stinging pain from the wound quickly turned into a burning sensation. Clearly, apart from being sharp, the claw was tainted with some sort of poison. Hacksword slowly turned his head and saw a huge monster standing behind him. Apart from its scythe-shaped bone claw and its abdomen, which was used to hold prey tightly, it was difficult to associate it with the blade of the past. In the mist in the distance, there were many similar black shadows crawling toward them. So this was what the Guardian meant when he said that there wasn't much time left. Hacksword's vision began to blur, and at that moment, the blade that pierced through him opened its bloody mouth and bit down. On the other side, Silent Disaster suddenly opened his eyes. Chapter 14:12. After connecting to her consciousness, the pain that spread throughout her body followed. But for Silent Disaster, this was something that she had long gotten used to. Fighting against the enemies that swarmed at her like a tidal wave on the battlefield, and then waking up in the red mist pond was how she had always lived. Every time she approached her limits, she would become stronger. As for the price of pain, it was nothing. But this time, it was different. She stared blankly at the tumbling red mist in front of her, her mind constantly recalling the feeling she had when she woke up. Was it an illusion? Just now, there was a ripple in the realm of mind. If not for the fact that she happened to be at the bottom of the birth tower and was in a half-awake state, it would have been difficult for her to sense the minute change. Similar ripples were rare, and the last time it was triggered was by the genius general of the race, Osruk. That meant the fall of a senior lord. What exactly happened in the north? Was her perception wrong, or was the ripple purely a coincidence? No, she had to confirm it with Nasipel. At the same time, she had to ask him how long she had been unconscious, as well as the situation on the Western Front. Silent Disaster endured the pain and crawled out of the red mist pond. When she passed by Valkyries, she slowed down. Even though Sky Lord believed that it would be equally safe to place the Nightmare Lord's body in Sky City, she insisted on bringing it to the deity of gods. There were indeed safety considerations in this, but it was more for another reason. This way, as long as she was not on the battlefield, she could always be by her side. Don't worry, I will bring his head to you. Silent Disaster said softly. She had already deeply engraved the appearance of the human male that appeared in the divine domain. This person was undoubtedly the culprit that caused the Nightmare Lord to be lost in the realm of mind. Only by killing this person with her own hands could Valkyries obtain true peace. In the experimental field, Silent Disaster found fake Nasipel. You recovered rather quickly, Nasipel said in amazement. This recovery speed is rare even among senior lords. Sometimes, I'm really curious, what kind of monster can be created by fusing you with the symbiotic demons? Silent Disaster couldn't be bothered with such nonsense. How long did I stay in the red mist pond? In less than a week, the deity of gods has already entered the borders of the Kingdom of Dawn. You didn't see how the lowlifes are fleeing in panic. All I did was throw a few activated spears and it caused their city to collapse. Nasapel let out a sinister laugh. Flames, trampling, screaming, panic. This is what worms should be like. Has Haxord contacted you recently? Didn't it say that it would personally inspect the Sea of Clouds path to improve the transportation efficiency of the ridge of the continent? I don't think it will report to me voluntarily. Mask shook his towering head and said, to be honest, that's what he should be doing. The position of Western Commander doesn't suit him at all. The king did not wish for the strength of the main battlefield to be greatly reduced, so he let Sky Lord be in charge of the Western Front. In the end, isn't it still up to me, Nasapel, to clean up the mess? Silent Disaster's heart sank slightly. In less than a week, in addition to the days before she fell unconscious, it was more than 2 weeks. Even if the ridge of the continent was rather far, to Haxord, such a long period of time was enough for him to traverse the ridge 2 or 3 times. His combat strength wasn't outstanding, and in the recent half a year, many sentries had observed signs of the increase in demonic beasts in the sea. It wasn't impossible for the Sky Sea realm to attack the connection point between the 2 continents from the rear. Could it be, follow me to the birth tower? Silent Disaster no longer hesitated. I want to meet the king. She had yet to recover from her injuries and needed to borrow the power of the controller of the deity of gods to connect with the king's consciousness at this distance. At this moment, Nasapel also noticed something amiss. What happened? There's a ripple in the realm of mind, Silent Disaster said straightforwardly. You know I'm not good at such illusory things. That's why I need to contact the king. If it wasn't an illusion, the king definitely knows the meaning of the ripple better than I do, Silent Disaster replied. At the top of the birth tower, Nasapel placed his palm on the tower and concentrated on condensing magic power. Senior lords all had different talents. There were outstanding ones like Valkyries who could infiltrate into the depths of the realm of mind alone, as well as those like Mask who were nearly blind and slow. Without the help of the birth tower, it was nearly impossible for them to communicate with the realm of mind. Silent Disaster waited patiently for a while, but ultimately did not hear a reply. What's going on? She could not help but frown. Is he not done yet? If it wasn't for the anxiety hidden in its heart, it wouldn't have asked so many questions. But Nasapel turned around and said in a tone of extreme surprise. Nothing, what's nothing? The presiding Holy See, I can't find any traces of the king. Silent Disaster could not help but be stunned. The king was the core of the entire race, and the presiding Holy See was equivalent to a lighthouse in the vast sea. Now that the beacon had disappeared, it meant that they had temporarily lost the ability to communicate with the Blackstone region. Of course, it was impossible for the king to perish, otherwise, the strong ripples that were stirred up would have been felt by all the demon owners. The only question was, what unforeseen event happened that caused the king to shut down the realm of mind? Clearly, before the presiding Holy See reappeared, she had no way of knowing the answer. Kingdom of Dawn, City of Glow Castle. That's the deity of gods. Roland stood at the top of the castle and looked at the slowly moving shadow in the horizon. Even though he had already expected it, he still felt a heartfelt shock when he saw it for the first time. It was not a special effect from a movie screen, but something that truly existed, a floating island that could accommodate Neverwinter and Longsong. It was a perfect example of big being good. Just looking at it from afar was enough to make one's emotions swell. If the surface of the black rock layer was covered with steel frames and steam pipes, it would be a dream creation. It was no wonder that the demon's higher-ups were so confident in it. Nightingale leaned closer to him with a look of high vigilance. Don't worry, Roland said helplessly. You won't encounter any danger if you just watch from afar. An unfamiliar territory in itself means danger, Nightingale said unhappily. I can check every stranger that enters and exits Neverwinter Castle, but I can't search all the nobles in the Kingdom of Dawn. Why did you insist on coming to the front lines? Because the development of the situation no longer allows me to stay in the stable western region. Roland shook his head. The First Army's first defeat, the deity of gods suddenly turning towards the Hermes Plateau, and the neighboring countries erupting into a plague of panic, all of these news made him determined. Be it boosting the morale of the First Army or stabilizing the confidence of the allies of the Kingdom of Dawn, he needed to step forward. In any era or civilization, this action was the most direct and effective method of encouragement. He then looked at Horford Quinn. Your officials and ministers should have all arrived, right? They are waiting in the conference hall. Very good, let us discuss what to do next. As you wish, Your Majesty. The King of Dawn placed his hand on his chest calmly. Chapter 14:13. The conference hall of the Kingdom of Dawn's capital was much larger than Neverwinter's, and even with 100 people seated, it did not feel cramped. Separated by the long table, the participants were split into two distinct factions. On one side were the higher-ups of Grey Castle led by Roland, and on the other side were the nobles and the representatives of the Chamber of Commerce. Compared to the composed and calm Grey Castle members who were quietly waiting for the conference to begin, the latter were obviously restless. Many looked anxious and whispered to each other from time to time. The whispers never stopped. It was obvious that the appearance of the deity of gods had a huge impact on them. If they could not stop the spread of fear, the neighboring country's order could collapse at any time. Roland knew that he had to stabilize the confidence of his allies before that happened. According to the Administrative Office's report, ever since Horford became the new king of the Kingdom of Dawn, the trade between both sides had reached new heights. Currently, nearly 20% of the iron, copper, aluminum, and other raw materials and crude products that were shipped into Neverwinter came from neighboring countries. Leather, fabrics, cured meat, milk, cheese, and other daily necessities accounted for more than half of the trade. Although he had put in a lot of effort in this area, without the support of the Kingdom of Dawn, it was impossible for Neverwinter to maintain the steady increase in the standard of living of the people despite the abnormal increase in population. Just this point alone made it impossible for him to abandon the Kingdom of Dawn. Furthermore, there was still the Quinn family that performed impeccably during the alliance. Roland did not know if there would be another supporter after Horford Quinn, but it was unlikely that there would be another person like Andrea Quinn who could perfectly link both sides. He quietly sized up every noble on his left until their whispers gradually died down. Only then did he speak. Since the outbreak of the war, I have often heard about your contributions in the reports, so I will say here first. Thank you for your hard work. Everyone could not help but reveal looks of shock. But to Roland, those words were not empty words. It was impossible for the First Army alone to operate the main road from north to south so quickly. The numerous horse carriages and porters on the road played a crucial role. In this era, most of the nobles left in a single wave and were used to plundering in place of supplies. Thus, very few understood the importance of logistics, and it was difficult for them to realize their contributions to the war. With regards to the Battle of Divine Will, I believe everyone understands it very well. Just as I have emphasized, the losing side will be completely annihilated, and there is no possibility of surrender. Therefore, other than resisting to the end, there is no other path. As early as 4 to 5 years ago, I have been preparing for this war. But Grey Castle isn't the only human kingdom. It requires everyone alive to participate, and only then can we win the battle of destiny. I am very happy to see that all of you have become a part of the resistance. Roland nodded to Berev, who opened a thick notebook and read aloud. It was a portion of the logistics records of the First Army. And of Roland of Dawn. He did not intend to persuade these nobles in a lyrical way. Words like defending the country and sacrificing themselves for mankind would not move them at all. Furthermore, the more accurate the description, the more convincing it was. First, he wanted these nobles to understand that even if they did not have to go to the front line, they could still make important contributions to the war. Second, these achievements would be recorded in black and white, and they could be exchanged for corresponding rewards after the war. In the end, all the nobles who were passively resisting or vainly attempting to betray the humans would receive the harshest punishment. At this crucial moment, Roland no longer had the energy to allow them to make their own choices. Horford nodded in agreement. The king of Greycastle could be said to have grasped the main point right from the start. Pulling the nobles who did not belong to the army into this event that would definitely be recorded in the annals of history and passed down for thousands of years would undoubtedly increase their sense of participation. It should be known that connecting family history to history was one of the goals that nobles pursued. Not to mention, with Roland's explanation, the risks and rewards seemed to be about the same. At the very least, he wouldn't be treated like an abandoned pawn. The distribution of benefits had always been a difficult problem for those in power. Several retainers' families had more than once suggested to him that there was no need to follow Roland Wimbledon's instructions to this extent and that he should behave more like the king of the Kingdom of Dawn, but he always laughed it off. Although the king of Greycastle, who manufactured cannons, biplanes, and steel ships, was worthy of respect, that was not the only reason why he valued him so much. The real benefits that his family had obtained were the reason why he was determined to be loyal. In the trade between the Kingdom of Dawn and Greycastle, the King of Greycastle did not use his powerful strength or his relationship with his daughter Andrea to take advantage of the trade. On the contrary, he paid the Kingdom of Dawn according to the actual price, and sometimes even gave up a part of the profits, so that everyone involved in the trade could benefit greatly, which was more important than strength. Andrea must have also seen this point, which was why she made such a suggestion to him. Compared to the two, his other son, Horn, was far too inferior. His Majesty, the premise of all this is that the humans can win in the end. After Berev finished his speech, someone stood up and asked, "The question is, can Greycastle really defeat the demons?" "I heard that." He hesitated for a moment. "Your army seems to have suffered a defeat in the Kingdom of Wolfheart." "That's right. We all know how powerful the First Army is," another person echoed worriedly. "But this floating island is really too terrifying. Once it comes crashing down, we won't even have time to escape." Roland picked up his teacup and slowly took a sip of black tea. He knew that the results of the battle in the impassable mountain range would spread sooner or later. After all, among the people who carried out the follow-up search and rescue, there were many people who were familiar with the terrain in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. In this battle, more than 1,000 soldiers lost contact with each other. Not only the artillery unit, but even the reserve team responsible for providing support also suffered heavy losses. On the other hand, the Air Knight lost more than 40 planes in the high-intensity battle. Half of them were shot down by the enemy, while the other half were destroyed due to mechanical malfunctions and accidents. This was also the reason why Tilly had no choice but to postpone the operation. Fortunately, although the Seagull was struck by divine will, both Vendi and Shavi were experts in controlling the situation. In addition, Lightning and Maggie stood guard nearby, allowing them to quickly rescue all the witches on the plane after the forced landing. Honestly speaking, when Roland first saw the report, his heart was in his throat. From the number of troops lost, this was the battle with the highest number of casualties. However, he agreed with the General Staff's actions. Valkyries only understood the principles behind the deity of gods, but did not know the details of the symbiotic demons carried on board. If they did not fight, they would never be able to understand the enemy's details. "This failure is due to our lack of understanding of the floating island," Roland answered honestly. "It looks huge, magnificent, and invulnerable, but that is not the case. Edith, you will explain to everyone." "Yes." The Pearl of the Northern Region pinned the detailed drawings of the deity of gods on the wall and explained in detail. According to the First Army's observations, it is roughly circular in shape, with a diameter of 50 to 60 kilometers, comparable to the impassable mountain range. The upper part and the vertebrae can fire giant stone spears, with a range of at least 15 kilometers. This is the key weapon that caught the First Army off guard. But at the same time, it also means that once they leave this distance, it will just be a floating island in the sky. We can use this point to formulate a plan and restrain the enemy. Fear was always accompanied by the unknown. People would be afraid of emotional experiences and vague descriptions, but they would not be afraid of a bunch of numbers. Rather than painstakingly concealing their failure or using empty words to deceive everyone, it was better to reveal the information that the First Army had paid a huge price to obtain, so as to eliminate the fear on a rational level. That is all the details of the demon's floating island. Edith placed her hand on her chest and said to Roland. Roland then looked at the noble from the Kingdom of Dawn who had raised the question. Lastly, I will add one more point. Avoiding the attack range of the stone pillars is only a temporary measure. Completely destroying this floating fortress in the sky is the army's ultimate goal. The noble swallowed his saliva. That's a mountain that is upside down. It's not that humans don't have the ability to do so, it's just that you have yet to realize it. Just like before the airplane was manufactured, no one believed that they could fly in the blue sky like a bird. Roland laughed. This point, I will let you witness with your own eyes. Chapter 14:14. The nobles who could enter the castle's conference hall were basically supporters of the three major families in the city of Glow. Many of them had participated in the construction of the north-south artery and relied on the introduction of steam engines and the production of calcined cement to make a fortune. Most of them had been to Thorntown and witnessed the Air Knights training at close range. Hearing the confidence of the King of Greycastle, the anxiety on everyone's faces finally dissipated. In any case, such an open and honest meeting that only discussed data and details was a rare experience for the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn. Compared to flattery or empty words of comfort, accurate discussions were naturally more persuasive. Then, what do we need to do? Someone asked. Maintain the status quo, Roland said bluntly. A stable Kingdom of Dawn is the greatest help to the war. But now that panic has begun to spread, if we take any forceful measures, I'm afraid it will only have the opposite effect on the refugees. That's because the demons used the red mist to invade the border territories, and this situation will not continue to worsen, Roland consoled. Greycastle will also do its best to assist you in stabilizing the situation. Territories that are threatened by the demons will also be exempted from paying tribute and will be given subsidies according to the situation. Horford added in a timely manner. Everyone, this is a war that concerns the fate of everyone. No one can stay out of it. I, Horford Quinn, hereby swear in the name of my ancestors that regardless of the outcome, I will not take a step out of the City of Glow. If the Kingdom of Dawn is destroyed by the demons, then this castle will be my grave. After receiving the guarantee, the nobles who were slightly relieved left the hall and quickly entered the second part of the meeting. Apart from the King of Dawn, the rest were the upper echelons of Greycastle. Your Majesty, regarding the previous battle, I am willing to take full responsibility. Iron Axe and Edith stood up at the same time and looked at each other in surprise. No one can predict what kind of offensive methods the deity of gods possesses. Roland shook his head. Don't tell me that when you first formulated the plan, you never considered the possibility of the reserve team being attacked or even destroyed. The two could only choose to remain silent. A small team would be probing the enemy, while the other teams would act according to the situation. This was considered a common tactic when formulating a strategy. However, it would be foolish to think that losses would only occur to the probing team. He believed that the general staff would not make such a low-level mistake. In other words, the moment you decided to implement the plan, you tacitly agreed that the significance of the plan was greater than the risk that these two troops had to take. Otherwise, this proposal would not have been approved in the first place. Don't worry, I won't use the number of casualties to measure your merits and faults, even if it was indeed the First Army's greatest loss in battle. Your Majesty, but don't forget, Roland said with a serious tone, these soldiers also have their own families. Don't treat their sacrifice as a number on a piece of paper. I hope you will keep this in mind every time you come up with a plan. Yes, Your Majesty, Iron Axe and Edith said in unison. Then let's talk about your views on the upcoming war. Yes. The Pearl of the Northern Region changed to a new map. After analysis, the General Staff believes that there are two most likely places for the floating fortress to turn around. One is the border of the Cage Mountain, and the other is the Hermes Plateau. The former can ensure the capture of the Kingdom of Wolfheart and threaten the Kingdom of Dawn at the same time, while the latter can allow the Red Mist to invade all 4 countries at the same time, turning the impassable mountain range into a passage connecting to the ridge of the continent. But now that it has crossed the border of the Kingdom of Dawn, according to its trajectory, it is very likely that it is heading for the Hermes Plateau. Roland nodded. "How's the evacuation going over there?" "Very smoothly," Agatha replied. "Isabella is now the true leader of the church. Their actions are far more efficient than the ordinary people. It is estimated that they will be able to evacuate the old and new cities in 2 to 3 days. That's good. Before your Glory of the Sun is completed, we are powerless to stop the advance of the floating fortress," Edith continued. "Once it occupies the Hermes Plateau, the red mist is likely to spread to the front line of Silver City, and the entire Kingdom of Dawn will be engulfed. If we lose the support of the witches, we will definitely fall into an extremely passive situation." It has still come to this. Roland sighed inwardly. After all, erecting an obelisk in the holy city of Tequila was already a huge threat to the human kingdoms, not to mention directly stabbing it in the face. Of course, the obelisk in Tequila could directly invade Neverwinter, while the obelisk in the Hermes Plateau could only cover Silver City. That was the biggest difference. Once the only industrial area was invaded by the red mist, the consequences would be unthinkable. The rapid increase in strength of Greycastle was inseparable from the witches. In Neverwinter, the sleeping spell was already involved in many aspects of the city's development, such as removing parasites from ships, alleviating workers' fatigue, assisting in precision processing, planting coral reefs to expand the shoal area, and so on. Although core industries such as steelmaking did not require witches to maintain, the overall efficiency was unavoidable. Fortunately, be it the steam engine, internal combustion engine, or the Rubik's Cube, all of them could operate normally in the red mist, giving the humans their greatest trump card. It seems like before the deity of gods is destroyed, we will have to fight the enemy in the red mist for a period of time. His gaze swept across everyone. In addition, I came here with a piece of good news. Glory of the Sun has already completed its final design, and a new round of theoretical tests will soon begin. If it succeeds, this aerial fortress will not last until the day the red mist engulfs the Kingdom of Dawn. Everyone immediately revealed looks of joy. Is that true? That's great. Roland revealed a trace of a smile. Then, how exactly should we complete this decisive blow? We can now put it on the agenda. After an entire afternoon of discussion, the general plan was basically confirmed. Due to the uniqueness of the deity of gods, the First Army did not have many choices. They could either set up a detonation device in advance and destroy the core from the red mist's exit, or drop it from the sky and destroy the obelisk in one go. Other than that, the other methods were extremely limited in terms of damage to the deity of gods. The advantage of the former was that it was easy to implement and did not require the precondition of a bomber, but the effects were difficult to guarantee. Hermes Plateau was rather vast, and no one knew where the deity of gods would ultimately stop. Once it deviated from the red mist's exit, the effects of the explosion would be greatly reduced. Furthermore, it was still a question whether the glory of the sun could turn the red mist waterfall into a high-temperature pillar of fire. The further the floating island was from the surface, the higher the uncertainty. Furthermore, Lucia could only extract so much pure uranium, so the plan was ultimately rejected. The airdrop still faced difficulties in terms of technology and implementation. But as long as it succeeded, the bomb would detonate near the Red Mist Lake, which would ensure the greatest extent of its power. Since that's the case, let's formulate a plan based on this conclusion. Roland slammed his hand on the table. In addition, the air raid rehearsal and the prototype bomb test will be carried out at the same time. The debt we lost to the demons should be repaid by the demons. As you wish, Your Majesty. Everyone bowed in unison. Chapter 14-15. For most people, this night was a rare moment for them to relax. Although the demons' floating city was still moving towards Hermes day and night, at least the king of the Kingdom of Dawn could not see it. Being far away from the front line gave them a short period of peace, especially when they would have to rush to the battlefield again the next day and go their separate ways. This peace was even more precious. When Andrea walked into the courtyard of the family mansion, Horford Quinn was already waiting for her at the door. "Welcome home, daughter." Andrea nodded slightly. This was the first time she had returned to the family mansion after a year. She did not barge in but was welcomed by the servants. To be honest, she would have preferred to spend this time by Tilly's side. However, when she received his invitation, she felt a little touched and finally agreed to it. He could have told her this directly after the meeting. Perhaps, he was also afraid that she would refuse. But when they met face to face, she did not know what to say. After all, this was different from the last time they met. At that time, she came with a mission, but now it was just a slightly unfamiliar reunion. "What do you want to talk to me about?" Andrea asked as they walked along the corridor. "A lot, such as what you experienced at the front line, your companions, and Mr. Roland Wimbledon. That's just a fool, there's nothing to talk about," Andrea replied casually, and then realized that it was inappropriate. I mean, I can see that he's a tolerant king." Horford smiled. "Don't worry, I know you're not used to it. If it's just the two of us talking, I'm afraid it'll be a very difficult night, so I've made some preparations." "Preparations?" "You'll understand when you get in." He stopped at the door of the main hall. Andrea opened the door doubtfully. Before she could see the situation in the room, a figure rushed towards her. "I missed you so much, Sister Quinn." So that's why, she was a little amused as she opened her arms and allowed him to hug her. It was Belinda Luashi. There were two other people at the long table, Otto Luashi and Oro Tokat. The latter two also seemed rather excited, and Otto even seemed to be at a loss. This scene instantly made Andrea feel as if she had returned to more than 10 years ago, when she had yet to awaken as a witch. Belinda's incessant chatter and Oro's enthusiasm quickly dispelled the initial awkwardness. Father, who almost never laughed and chatted with his juniors, also sat down with them. He really put in a lot of effort just to chat with me. Andrea suddenly realized that the little bit of hatred in her heart was almost gone. By the way, we'll go to Neverwinter after the war. We'll see each other often then. Belinda winked at her. Andrea raised her eyebrows in surprise. You mean, the three of us, of course. Yes, yes. Oro nodded vigorously. Wait a minute. Otto and Oro are the family heirs, right? Will the two old earls of your family agree to leave the territory for a long time? Andrea looked at Otto suspiciously. Could it be that this guy was secretly instigating them? Wouldn't that be too irresponsible? No, it's not what you think, Otto hurriedly waved his hands and stammered. Although I hope so, that's only part of the reason. Anyway, let me explain it to you. Belinda patted her brother's shoulder sympathetically and then said to Andrea, you rarely stay in the Kingdom of Dawn, so you don't know the recent changes. Nowadays, among the nobles in the big cities, especially in the City of Glow, there's a saying that if a family knows nothing about natural science, then it's doomed to decline. Natural science? Could it be? That's right. Belinda nodded with a smile. At first, it was indeed the natural science theoretical basis published in Neverwinter, but now it's divided into many subjects. Some people call it the New Sage theory, while others think that alchemy and astrology are only part of it. But no matter what, there's indeed such a trend among the nobles. As long as it's a natural science book from Neverwinter, merchants will buy it at a high price. Father was also affected, so when we brought up this idea, he didn't object too much. After all, self-study is not as good as professional guidance. She continued, moreover, several families have already taken the lead, and Father probably doesn't want the Luashi family to fall behind. So this is not an irresponsible way to do it. In my father's words, he can still hold on for a few more years. They're just stimulated by airplanes and steel ships. Oro shrugged nonchalantly. Of course, I'm all for it if they can let me travel. That's what I wanted to say. Otto took a breath and said, also, we're planning to hold a reading club. What's that? Andrea asked curiously. There's so much to learn about natural science, and it's not enough for just the three of us. Belinda spread out her hands and said, so we want to select some merchants and civilians with good qualifications and give them a chance to learn about natural science. If they perform well, they'll be accepted into the family. This is killing two birds with one stone. What do you think? Andrea didn't know how to answer for a moment. She suddenly realized that whether it was her father or the others, they were all changing. Witches, who were regarded as taboo in the past, and the evil kingdom of Greycastle, which protected witches and removed the feudal power of the nobles, would never be a model that the upper class of the Kingdom of Dawn would be willing to follow. Also, it was against tradition to accept ordinary people into the family. But now, these once clear boundaries had begun to blur. She couldn't help but look at her father, Horford Quinn. Without a doubt, he must have played a part in this. He was indeed working hard to make up for his mistakes. What had happened could never be erased, but the subsequent changes could at least prevent it from repeating. Is this what you want to express, father? In the next few days, Greycastle and the Kingdom of Dawn launched a joint operation. The nobles set up nearly 100 reception points on the main roads in the northwest to provide food and shelter for the panicking refugees. The medical team of the First Army, under the protection of the gods' punishment witches, treated the sick and wounded. Gentle and pleasant songs often rang out in the places where the refugees were the most concentrated. Even the most agitated people would quickly calm down when they heard such a voice. The Church of Hermes also launched a tour under the leadership of the new Pope Isabella to comfort the refugees who were forced to evacuate their homes. Even after all the turmoil, the Church still had a certain influence among the people. For them, apart from the people of Greycastle, only the Church that served God had the ability to fight against the demons. With the efforts of many parties, the panic was finally brought under control before it caused irreversible damage. Although the refugees could not return to their original towns for a period of time, the places that had not been affected were finally stabilized. The First Army's air raid rehearsal was also ready at this moment. Chapter 14-16. Early in the morning, a ray of light appeared in the hazy sky. Most of the people were still asleep, but in the newly opened landing field on the outskirts of the city of Glow, the garrison and ground crew had been busy for a long time. They rushed to both ends of the runway in the chilly spring wind, and their inner liners were already soaked with sweat. Planes were being towed out of the warehouse to the end of the runway. The final loading, and inspection work had also come to an end. In the barracks next to the landing field, Tilly gathered all the experienced air night pilots together. After a few rounds of enrollment and the teaching method of letting the old teach the new, there were now more than 100 people who could go to the battlefield, and the number of students who were undergoing intensive training had doubled. At this point, the new army, that was independent of the ground forces, was beginning to take shape. In the previous battle in the impassable mountain range, although many planes were lost, the chances of the pilots surviving were not low. Compared to the infantry, which was difficult to shake off the demons' pursuit, the fire of heaven could rely on gliding to quickly leave the battlefield even if it lost its combat ability. Therefore, regardless of whether it was shot down by the enemy or crashed due to mechanical failure, as long as it was not too bad luck, the experienced pilots would basically be able to hold on until they reached a suitable landing area. Of course, this was also related to the biplane's low speed and natural ability to lift. The demons' spears lacked the ability to kill in one hit. These factors allowed the entire team to mature at an extremely fast speed. You should know the details of this mission very well. Tilly crossed her arms and slowly walked to the front of the team. Like the soldiers who were about to go to war, she was also wearing a thick windproof combat suit. Her long gray hair was tied up behind her head and matched with a blue sash. She looked neat and spirited. Break through the enemy's defensive line and throw the bombs into the hinterland of the floating fortress, just like what we did during the training a few days ago. But this time, you will not be flying over the outskirts of the city of Glow, but above the enemy's fortress. The ones intercepting you will not be the Academy students, but the devil beasts and senior demons. Your Highness. Someone in the team suddenly raised his hand. Speak. Isn't that simpler? The person who spoke was good, and his words caused a burst of low laughter. Tilly also raised the corner of her mouth. She didn't object to this kind of arrogant conversation. On the contrary, on the eve of the battle, the high-spirited fighting spirit helped everyone to ease the tension. Moreover, Good had already killed 12 devil beasts, so it was not too arrogant of him to say that. It seems so, but the senior demon behind the devil beasts is still not to be underestimated. I hope you can come back alive to prove this point. At this point, Tilly changed the topic. Also, I must emphasize that the floating island is extremely large. Breaking into the central region means that the surrounding area is the territory of the demons. You can imagine the consequences of landing there. Therefore, we should try our best to avoid any accidents during this operation. I want you to temporarily put aside the idea of gambling on the chance of being stabbed by a demon in exchange for killing the enemy. Understand? Yes, Your Highness. Very good, then next is the team arrangement. The people assigned to the Wrath of Heaven will be responsible for dropping bombs for this mission. With that said, all the Free Knight pricked up their ears. The Wrath of Heaven was the first modified version of the Fire of Heaven. Its body was more compact, and the cockpit had an additional glass cover. Not only was its appearance more beautiful than the Fire of Heaven, its performance was also greatly improved. The most crucial changes came from the new star-shaped engine and the external weapon system. The former was considered an inferior version of the Phoenix's engine, and its power was limited to a relatively low level. It was also not equipped with a pressurization system, so as to meet the production standards of the assembly line. The latter could be decided based on the mission, and could include autocannons and bombs. And the first batch of 10 Wrath of Heaven had already been transported here by ship. They were the core of the air raid rehearsal, and whoever could pilot the new planes would undoubtedly be recognized by the Princess Royal. Tilly deliberately paused for a moment before taking out a name list. According to the plan, these 10 planes will be split into 2 teams, and will be protected by the corresponding escorts. The leader of the first team will be Good. Yes, Your Highness. Everyone cast envious gazes at him. As the aerial knight member with the best results, his selection was without a doubt. The leader of the second team will be Manfeld. The latter was slightly taken aback, and only reacted after a while. Your Highness, you chose me. Is there a second Manfeld here? Tilly raised her eyebrows. Yes, yes. Your subordinate obeys. Manfeld was overjoyed as he replied. This also caused a wave of hushed whispers in the team. Compared to the other experienced aerial knight members, his battle record could be counted on one's fingers, and he was purely a rookie. In the previous battle at the impassable mountain range, his battle results were not outstanding, and he was only able to shoot down a plane. Even though he performed well during training, his performance as a team leader had exceeded everyone's expectations. However, Tilly knew that this rookie was extremely talented, and this was not only reflected in his piloting, but also in intense battles. In terms of flying skills, Manfeld Castian could be ranked in the top 10 of the team, but in terms of battle sense, he far surpassed the rest. In the aerial battle at the impassable mountain range, she was the only one who noticed that Manfeld's plane had been roaming around the weakest position of the team, and he had chased away enemy troops that attempted to penetrate through that position, thus freeing her Phoenix. Regardless of whether he was covering for his teammates' attacks or removing danger for his teammates, he would always appear at the most needed position. This was definitely not an easy task. The situation in the air was ever-changing, and most people could only pay attention to themselves and their wingmen. This was also the reason why flying formations needed to be as meticulous as possible. To be able to observe the entire situation in the midst of an intense battle and capture the most efficient entry point, his sharpness and vision far exceeded that of flying itself. Compared to Good, who had outstanding individual skills, Manfeld's advantage lay in his teamwork. Perhaps even he himself did not realize where his true talent lay. In fact, after the battle ended, Tilly had immediately looked up the detailed records of this person. The knight's family background could explain where his accomplishments came from, but it was worth pondering that such a knight was unable to save his declining family. Manfeld's physique and strength had restricted his performance in close combat. If it was a one-on-one battle, she suspected that Carter could defeat him with one hand. But the roaring engine and cannons did not care about the strength of the pilot. With the power of the biplane, the vast and boundless sky was clearly a field that was more suitable for him to display his abilities. Tilly did not mention the reason for her choice, as she believed that after a few more battles, Manfeld and the others would naturally notice it. After handing over the names of the 2 crew members, she raised her head to look at the sun's position before issuing the order to move. Under the command of the flag signals, the Phoenix was the first to glide across the runway and rise into the sky. The golden rays of light reflected off its metal wings and formed a dazzling halo. Following closely behind was the Seagull. After the first plane had crashed, Anna had quickly rushed to produce a second one. To her, this sort of practice made perfect, and it did not take her much effort. Finally, there were 40 fires of heaven and 10 fury of heaven with bombs hanging on them. They formed a massive fleet that majestically flew past the city of Glow and disappeared into the clouds in the west. Chapter 14-17. At the same time, Roland stood at the top of the castle and watched as the fleet gradually left. "Isn't this a little too fast?" Nightingale asked worriedly. "The new biplanes just arrived a day ago. They haven't even completed the formal bombing training." After following Roland for a long time, she had a basic understanding of the First Army's battle procedures. Every time a new plan was born, rehearsals were an essential step. First, the general staff would conduct repeated deductions on paper, and only after confirming that it was highly feasible would they move on to the actual training phase. Although the purpose of this operation was to prepare for the glory of the sun, it was also a relatively independent operation. According to convention, the participants should first practice the dropping of bombs, and only put it into action after they were 90% sure of it. Indeed, but time waits for no man. Roland nodded. Currently, all the reports indicate that Haxor did not appear in the battle in the mountains. In other words, the letter worked. The problem is that the Sky Lord is paranoid by nature. No one knows how long a letter will keep him away from the battlefield, so it's best to carry out the air raid as soon as possible. In essence, it was the same as the battle in the mountains. How would the enemy react to an air raid? Would the deity of gods have any corresponding defensive measures? These were all questions that needed to be confirmed before the decisive battle. Then, will it really be all right not to train? Don't worry. Roland laughed. Tilly has already thought of a countermeasure. Horizontal bombing was a technical job that required the cooperation of the crew and the equipment on the plane. Without 10 days to half a month of practice, one would only be able to hear a sound. Furthermore, in order to save time, the first batch of Fury of Heaven's aircrafts were not equipped with bombing sights, so training was impossible. Tilly's plan was to let Sylvie take over the command center. As long as the speed and altitude of the plane were determined, the landing point could be calculated. Therefore, the whole process of dropping the bomb was extremely simple. The pilot did not even need to observe the ground. All he needed to do was to pull the trigger when he heard the order to drop the bomb. This line of thought was somewhat similar to the AWACS of the later generations. Searching for the enemy, positioning, and tracking were done by a third party. When the firing data was transmitted to the combat aircraft, the latter would activate the fire control radar and complete the final step of the attack. The Seagull was the AWACS aircraft that controlled the entire situation. So that's how it is. After listening to his explanation, Nightingale showed a look of understanding. As expected of Her Highness Tilly. Oh. Roland raised his eyebrows. I thought you would say that you're the only one who doesn't know anything. It might have been possible in the past. She rolled her eyes. But with Anna there, no matter how knowledgeable people are, they'll feel like they know nothing. I'm already used to it. Roland couldn't help but be speechless. This wasn't anything glorious, so how could she say it so confidently? However, the fact that the other party could mention the past so calmly surprised him. Besides, I've come to understand one thing after all these years. Nightingale shrugged. What is it? See, you don't know everything, do you? She faced the soft morning sun, the bangs on her forehead reflecting wisps of golden light. But since you've asked, I'll reluctantly tell you, that everyone has their own strengths, and there's no need to blindly imitate others. The most important thing is to be loyal to yourself. Do you only like people who know more? Roland was momentarily speechless. He didn't need to answer this question. From the other party's expression, he could tell that she knew this very well. That's what it is. So remember to put more chaos drinks in the cabinet. Nightingale shook her finger and turned to walk down the castle. When everyone returns in triumph, I'll have to invite them to celebrate. Looking at her back, Roland took a long time to react. This wasn't Neverwinter, where could he stuff drinks? Moreover, be loyal to myself, in other words, wasn't that an excuse for her own enjoyment? He shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, and followed her. This is the seagull. Your Highness, you have entered the defensive perimeter of the floating fortress. At 8:35 in the morning, Sylvie sent out the first warning through the sigil of listening. In at most another 15 minutes, the fleet will fly past the attack line of the stone pillars. Roger that. Tilly sneered. I see them. From the beginning, she had never thought of hiding from the demons. The deity of gods definitely had demons on guard. The moment Sylvie saw them, they would immediately see Sylvie. If the seagull were to be exposed, it would be disadvantageous to the plan. Thus, it was better to cut in head-on and attract most of the enemy's attention to the fleet of fighter jets. The moment Sylvie sent out the warning, the enemy had already reacted. Many black dots rose from the center of the continent and flew in the direction of the Kingdom of Dawn in groups. They're quite vigilant. Tilly expressionlessly turned on the radio station and turned the FM knob to all channels. Attention, the demons have appeared. Everyone, stay alert and prepare for battle. Team 1 and Team 2, proceed according to the plan. Understood, Good and Manfeld responded. The Air Knights formation was extremely simple. The 50 biplanes were split into 2 groups and carried out the bombing mission. The team flew above the clouds in an attempt to reduce the time taken for the enemy to detect them. Apart from the Fury of Heaven formation and the 5 planes protecting the Seagull, the remaining 35 Fire of Heaven planes were tasked to disperse the demons' defensive forces. The main fleet of fighter jets quickly closed in on the 10-kilometer perimeter of the fortress. At this distance, the black, scale-like rocks of the floating continent and the central city could be seen with the naked eye. But at this moment, the stone pillars surrounding the fortress had yet to rise, as though they did not exist. Indeed, that toy was not used to deal with the Air Knight. This is the Phoenix. Have you found the senior demon lord that attacked the ground troops? Tilly asked. Sylvie searched for a moment. Not yet. It seems like luck is on the side of the humans. Tilly turned back to glance at the slowly rising sun behind her. The dazzling rays of light happened to cover the direction of the Air Knight's attack. The weather isn't bad. It's a good day for a long sleep. She stepped on the throttle and with the loud roar of the engine, she pulled the plane up and was the first to pounce at the enemy. Her Highness Tilly has already made contact with the enemy, Sylvie reported with a grave expression. From the current situation, the Air Knight was clearly at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. After all, they had taken the initiative to attack the demon's lair, and the devil beasts were mobilized much faster than before. The enemies are still increasing. If this goes on, they will be surrounded. Vendi seemed to have seen through her worries. Relax, although there are more demons, the Air Knight does not need to shoot down all of them. We just need to delay them for about 10 minutes. In terms of speed, the group of beasts cannot compare to the Fire of Heaven. It's better for you to focus on the main target. That's right, the earlier we drop the bombs, the earlier we can turn and retreat. Worrying about both sides will only make us lose sight of one. Sylvie bit her lips and cast her consciousness towards the center of the continent. Passing through layers of red mist, an incomparably magnificent obelisk suddenly appeared in her vision. Even looking at it from a distance, one could feel its enormous size. Its height of several hundred meters made it look like a pillar standing in a deep pit. Any human building would be overshadowed in front of such a creation. Chapter 14:18. That's the target of this mission, Sylvie realized. The scene in the center of the continent was almost identical to the information provided by His Majesty. The city of demons was built around the obelisk, and there was a deep pit between the obelisk and the city. Countless low-level demons were attached to it, like parasitic worms on the surface of a tree, but upon closer inspection, one would discover that they were continuously digging at the rock wall, causing the pit to expand. The red mist settled here, forming a red lake, and the towers near the walls of the pit would fall into the lake one after another, becoming part of the giant pit. Rumor had it that the obelisk was not this huge from the start, and that it would break out of the ground like a living creature, continuously growing, and the pit that contained the red mist would also continue to expand. Thus, one could determine the age of a demon city from these 2 points. The city in front of them was undoubtedly shockingly ancient. Compared to the target, the figure of the biplane could only be described as insignificant. Not to mention the bombs it carried, even if it plunged into the pit, it would be hard to imagine that it could ignite the red mist lake. Suddenly, Sylvie let out a soft "ah." "What's wrong?" the attentive Vendi asked immediately. "I discovered a strange demon." A demon that appeared at the top of the obelisk attracted her attention. Based on the habits of demons that worshipped the sky, those that could reach the top of the obelisk would definitely not be ordinary. And from the appearance of the other party, it was clearly not an ordinary demon. It was wearing a large cloak that could cover 3 or 4 people, and it was covered with densely packed ornaments. When she got closer, she could see that there were all kinds of things, from bone knives to metal armor, and even a few screws. The enemy's head was also very special, it looked like a pillar, and there were many masks hanging on it, inexplicably giving people goosebumps. "Is its magical wave very strong?" "No, it's not strong." This was what puzzled Sylvie the most. Judging from its appearance, it was at least a senior demon, but after it appeared, it did not leap into the air, nor did it intend to gather mana to activate its ability. The only thing it did was to focus its attention on the direction where the Sky Knight was fighting. It did not intend to participate in the battle at all. Since it did not pose a threat to everyone, Sylvie did not pay too much attention to it. Now that the 2 Heaven's Wrath teams were nearing the edge of the city, she had to focus to accurately determine the best place to drop the bombs. 2 minutes later, she sent out the bombing order over the radio. "A small team can drop the bombs. Good understands." Even on a sunny day, the clouds above the impassable mountain range wouldn't be too high. Coupled with the height of the stronghold itself, it allowed the fury of heaven to remain undetected by the enemy. The 5 biplanes lined up in a row, and with a steady speed, they dropped the 150-kilogram bombs mounted on their bellies. The moment the heavy projectile left the hook, Good felt the body of the projectile suddenly lift up, as if his body had become much lighter. Unfortunately, he couldn't see the results of this battle with his own eyes. But Sylvie could see it very clearly. As the center of gravity of the 5 bombs was in front, they quickly turned their heads downwards. Using the inertia of the planes, they fell in a rapid arc towards the center of the city. In the last 500 meters, they were almost perpendicular to the ground. And the demons had also noticed these uninvited guests from the sky. Another group of devil beasts rose from the city and flew towards the clouds, but compared to the speed of the bombs, their movements paled in comparison. 5 black shadows rushed into the city, and the moment the bombs touched the ground, they turned into a scorching fireball. The smoke and gravel it brought up were tens of meters high, and the momentum far exceeded that of a 152 mm grenade. Even though Sylvie couldn't hear the sound, she could feel the earth-shattering shock from the violent explosion and the flying debris around her. At the same time, under the high heat wave, a few clear holes appeared in the red mist, just like the air holes in fluffy bread. Looking from above, the slowly spreading grayish-black smoke column was particularly eye-catching in the red mist. Perhaps this city had rarely been attacked in the past hundreds of years, but from the moment it broke into the impassable mountain range until today, the core area had been visited by humans twice in less than half a month. However, Sylvie's heart sank to the bottom. Due to the influence of the wind, although the impact points of the bombs were quite wide, at least they fell into the city, which was much more accurate than the Longsong cannons. But only 2 of them hit the Red Mist Lake, and neither of them made contact with the lake's surface before exploding directly in the air. The moment the fireball appeared, she saw a rippling blue light wave. It was just like the barrier on the senior demons. What happened? Vendi noticed her strange expression. There's a magic barrier around the obelisk, Sylvie murmured. The bombs didn't have any effect. Hey. Shavi turned her head in disbelief. You mean, the demons expanded the barrier to the level of a city? How is that possible? Of course, she knew it was a little unbelievable. The effect of an ability was usually related to the total amount of magic power. To make it effective in such a large area, even all the witches combined would not be able to do it. But the truth was right in front of her, and she had to believe it. That's right, the senior demon at the top of the tower. As the thought popped up in her mind, Sylvie saw the demon again, but this time it made her hair stand on end, and an indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. She saw that the demon had stretched out 7 or 8 skinny arms and taken off all the masks on its head, revealing an extremely distorted face. More than a dozen stacked heads looked up into the sky, among which there were demons, humans, and some unknown monsters. One of the faces of a woman was particularly glaring. They all showed different smiles, which could be said to be extremely strange. Sylvie could not hold it in any longer, and she bent over and vomited, and her ability was interrupted. Seeing this, Vendi immediately picked up the communicator. This is Seagull. Team 2, drop the bombs immediately and turn back. Understood. Did Team 1's bombing succeed? No, there's a magic barrier around the obelisk, and the bombs didn't enter the deep pit. Barrier? The other end was silent for a moment. I got it. But I want to try again. But something happened here, and I'm afraid Sylvie can't give you any more instructions for the time being. Moreover, the enemy's devil beasts are approaching the clouds. Don't worry, Team 1 will cover us. Vendi had no choice but to contact Tilly and report the situation. The latter did not mind at all. It's okay, let Team 2 try. We're not at the point of retreat yet. Chapter 14-19. At the same time, Good also received a message from the captain of Team 2. This is Manfeld. Senior Good, I want to fly out of the clouds. I hope you can help me. Fly out of the clouds? Are you crazy? This is the enemy's base camp. Before Good could reply, Finkin's roar came through the communicator. And you heard it. There's a barrier above the sea of fog. What can you do? Newbie, the battlefield is not a place for you to joke around. As the most advanced modified biplane, the Fury of Heaven was equipped with a radio. This was also the reason why the 10 planes dared to fly through the clouds without Tilly's guidance. Good did not directly refuse. He was more curious about Manfeld's intentions than his seniority in the academy. I heard your request, Manfeld. But even if you can see the target, you should also know that without Lady Sylvie's calibration, the chances of hitting the target are slim. Good had already noticed this talented student during training. It was said that Manfeld was a down-and-out knight who came to Greycastle because he could no longer survive in the kingdom of Wolfheart. Many empty knights who were born as commoners often called themselves seniors in front of him. This was also to vent their dissatisfaction at being oppressed by the nobles. To be honest, Good did not have a good impression of the knight of the kingdom of Wolfheart. They seemed arrogant and domineering, but when they encountered a truly strong enemy, they would usually run away faster than anyone else. Good had witnessed this kind of ugliness countless times when the Church of Hermes invaded the kingdom of Wolfheart. It was Good's first time seeing a knight like Manfeld who took the initiative to fight. Therefore, he wanted to know whether Manfeld was deliberately showing off in front of Her Highness Tilly or if he was really different from the rest. Senior, do you still remember how we used the body of the plane to control the trajectory of the bullets when we strafed? Manfeld replied. I think it should work on the bombs too. As soon as Manfeld finished speaking, the buzzing sound on the other side suddenly became softer, as though the surroundings had suddenly become much more spacious. This guy has flown out of the clouds. Finkin exclaimed. What should we do? Using the fuselage to control the dropping of the bomb. Good quickly realized the similarities. He coughed twice. We can't just leave Team 2 alone. Her Highness Tilly is watching from the side. Aha, you're right. Finkin paused for a moment and then said in a righteous tone, I'm good at protecting my teammates. Rest assured. Team 1 will deal with the devil beasts. Yeehaw. It was really easy to understand. Good sighed and pushed the control stick forward. The two groups leaped out of the clouds from different positions and swooped down, leaving two thin marks on the dome. At the same time, they formed a countercurrent to the devil beasts that were climbing upwards. Compared to the large number of the latter, although the fury of heaven roars were few in number, they gave off an indomitable aura. One group took a turn and collided head-on with the devil beasts, while the other group headed straight for the obelisk. At this distance, even without Sylvie's guidance, they would be able to locate the target with their naked eyes. Along the way, a portion of the demons attempted to intercept the 5 fury of heaven roars, but the difference in speed was obvious. The moment the devil beasts turned into level flight, they were left behind by the biplanes that brushed past them. As long as they did not initiate an aerial battle, even a fury of heaven roar with 150 kilograms of bombs was not something that the devil beasts could catch up to. After adjusting his direction several times, Manfeld dropped the bombs. His teammates followed suit. The bombs that left their hooks maintained a similar speed and path as the planes. They flew past the densely packed towers and high walls and headed straight for the red mist lake. Compared to dropping bombs from high altitude, these 5 bombs landed more closely together. Other than one being blocked by the obelisk, the remaining 4 detonated directly above the red mist lake. The successive explosions caused the entire city to tremble. Beneath the flames that soared into the sky, blue light flashed repeatedly. From start to finish, the red mist lake did not suffer the slightest impact. However, everyone noticed that the radiance was no longer as bright as it was at the beginning. Not bad, newbie. Finkin whistled. Good rolled away from the pursuit of the devil beasts and switched to the general channel. Reporting to Your Highness Tilly. Team 1 and 2 have completed their bombing mission. Requesting to return. Understood. Permission granted. The Phoenix quickly shot out a red signal flare. The fleet that was engaged in battle with the demons began to ascend. With the help of the dazzling sunlight, they disappeared into the blue sky. Mask let out a satisfied sigh. These humans were getting more and more out of his expectations. Splitting into 2, with the main force feigning an attack and retreating after striking without any delay. From the time the defense forces took to the skies to the end of the battle, only a short period of 30 minutes had passed. Such a flexible battle plan had undoubtedly maximized the strengths of the war machines. It was no wonder that Osruk was fearful of the humans. It seemed like he had wronged Osruk back then. But even the genius commander of the race only saw the threat and did not realize the essence of the mystery. On the other hand, even the clumsy and slow humans could travel freely in the sky with the help of the iron birds. Wouldn't it be even more astonishing if it were used on the race? When the time came, the Sky-Sea realm would no longer be an enemy that was difficult to deal with. The race would definitely be invincible. If Osruk had used such a reason to convince everyone, he might have stood on the other party's side. What a pity. What was that tremor just now? The door at the top of the tower opened as the armored silent disaster slowly walked out. Did the deity of gods suffer an attack? That's right, but you came a little late and did not make it in time for the exciting battle. Nasapel glanced at her. Speaking of which, are you dressed to fight? It's best you don't force yourself. It's none of your business. Silent Disaster replied softly. Where are the enemies? Nasipel pointed to the sky. They have probably discovered that the difference between the iron birds and the bogle beasts has become the most obvious breakthrough point for both sides. How ironic. During the second battle of Divine Will, this hard-to-obtain demonic body was the greatest asset for our race to obtain victory. Silent Disaster looked at the sky without a word and had an ugly expression. Don't worry. Nasipel wore the mask back on his face. After this observation, I have already thought of a countermeasure. Compared to the bogle beasts, their movements are too obvious. Right, since you desire battles so much, why don't you do me a favor? Don't be so serious, I'm not mocking you. Mask spread out his numerous arms. Previously, a few iron birds crashed to the southeast of the city. If the worms on them are still alive, capture them. I believe such a small matter shouldn't be too difficult for you. They have to be alive? Silent Disaster asked coldly. Of course. Nasipel laughed delightedly. Only fresh brains have the value of transplantation. Furthermore, they have just experienced an intense battle and have the most distinct impression of flying. They are the best tools for me to verify my countermeasure. This is the first time I'm absorbing the brains of ordinary worms. I wonder which lucky person will obtain this honor. Silent Disaster looked away in disgust and turned to walk towards the birth tower. Nasipel turned back without a care. He knew that no matter how much Silent Disaster disliked the method, he would do his best for the race. Mask looked at the distant human territory and slowly extended his palm forward. From this angle, it looked like he could grasp the entire continent in his palm with one hand. In a few more days, the deity of gods would enter the Hermes Highlands. The tens of thousands of symbiotic demons in the experimental grounds were ready to go. He wanted to let the king see that he alone could fight against an army. Be it bloodshed or Silent Disaster, they were just a foil to him. Suddenly, a light flashed in the distance. It came extremely quickly and disappeared just as quickly. Although the light was small, it was extremely bright, almost to the point of being glaring. It was like the reflection of the sun on the ocean, or the reflection of light from a mirror. Was that an illusion? Nasipel was taken aback. By the time he carefully looked in the direction of the Sea of Vortexes, the light had disappeared. Chapter 1420. By the way, is there anyone playing Invisible Guardian? Will stop updating for a day to tidy up the plot. Currently in the middle of typing, please wait for a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update.